Welcome to the 2018 Feagin Leadership Forum. These guys are really excited because this is the capstone of the scholars' year-long deep dive into leadership development. So they have been waiting for this day for a long time. So I'm thrilled that we're ready to go. Yeah, this is going to be great. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dean Taylor, and I started this program about 9 years ago, and it's fun to see it grow every year. And this year, like every year, it just keeps getting better and better. So I'm really excited for what we're going to share with all of you this weekend. It's going to be fantastic. I will start out by saying that we get support, and you'll see it up here. All our partners, we get tremendous support from Duke University, the health system, the hospital, departments. Think about the School of Medicine and giving us an opportunity to be in a facility like this, in a wonderful building that Colleen Grohusky helped design just about 4 years ago, right? Yeah, and what a great place to have our leadership forum. So thank you, Colleen. Yeah. As much support as we get from the institution, we don't get a lot of financial support from the institution. And I want to recognize where we get that financial support for our programmatic costs of running the Scholars Program and running the forum. In our corporate sponsors, of which there are many, and many of you are here, and I'm not going to delay the start of the forum, but I do want to recognize all your contributions, because without you, we couldn't do this. So thank you, corporate sponsors. In addition, many of you have contributed to this program, and you've been very generous to help us pay for the experience that the scholars have, and it's a tremendous experience. We ask that you please consider contributing. Again, in your programs, you'll find an envelope where you can contribute to the program. And about that program, you'll find the bios of all the scholars and the speakers. So we're not going to spend a lot of time during this forum doing lengthy introductions because we want to get right to the meat of it. And we will move this program along quickly so that we can really take advantage of the time that we have together, which is somewhat limited. At this point, I would like to introduce Rhonda Brandon, who is the Director of Human Resources for the Duke University Health System. And Rhonda would like to provide her own welcome on behalf of Duke. So Rhonda, come on up.
Good afternoon.
You want to get her up?
How's everyone this afternoon?
Well, thank you.
Oh, Rhonda comes back. That's wonderful. It's great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just here to say hello and to welcome, but I must start by saying Dean Taylor is my new BFF. We were introduced to each other about a year ago now by my boss, the Chancellor, Dr. Eugene Washington, because I think Dr. Washington knew we both had a passion and have a passion for leadership and leadership learning. So it's been a wild ride ever since I've gotten to know Dean. And we have something up our sleeves you may have heard about. We're looking at putting on a conference next year that we think will have global reach, worldwide impact. And we're excited about that. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? Yeah. Yay, exactly. I love your enthusiasm. Okay. I have some notes that I am going to stick with in my comments so that I don't stand up here too long and take too much of your time, because there's a great program and a great set of learning ahead. So let me get back to what I was going to say, but you are an important group today. You're an important group today, and ones that have come together for additional learning. And when I looked at the topic for today, influencing others, leading effectively without authority, I said, oh my gosh, that's my life, right? I'm in charge of human resources, but in charge of little. authority, from an authority perspective, I have to do a lot of influencing. So I cannot wait to get back to my seat and learn from you what I can be doing better. But influencing without authority, that is my life. And being in HR, I have a front row seat to seeing the caliber of people who come to Duke, and we truly attract the very best and the brightest. The technical skills and expertise we have within our walls is beyond compare. Now, I've only been here 2 years and 117 days, but it has been quite an incredible journey. And when I tell people that I work for Duke, they just cannot wait to hear more about the incredible experience that I share in being here. So I'm very, very grateful for being a part of this institution. On the other side of technical skills, however, there are those intangible assets that are harder to come by. You know them, the skills that sometimes our muscles have to be exercised a bit to make sure that we take time to cultivate them, to nurture them, and to develop them. Now, what are the skills I'm talking about? Those intangibles like integrity, diplomacy, being a great communicator, caring for each other, and having the emotional intelligence necessary to deliver care not only to our patients, but to the teams of individuals that we also serve. These attributes are foundational to our culture and very critical to our success. Now, I took a look at the Feagin's program website most recently, and the quote of the week said, "A talent of speaking differently rather than arguing well is the chief instrument of cultural change." May I say that again? I think I heard somebody say yes. Okay. A talent of speaking differently rather than arguing well is a chief instrument of cultural change. So important. And we certainly are in a space of change, not only at Duke, but across healthcare, where the environment around us is changing rapidly. Cultural change is at our doorstep, and the skills and learnings you are proactively seeking out through this program is exactly what we need to see in our next generation of leaders. So, in that spirit, I encourage you to spend this afternoon and tomorrow with open and active minds, growing, connecting, and learning. But in closing, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the legend himself, Dr. John Feagin. Let's give him a hand, please. Thank you. Absolutely. It's my pleasure to meet you, Dr. Feagin, and you have had an incredible, bold vision that we celebrate today. Thank you so much for creating a tremendously generous legacy and gift to us that shapes our tomorrow. Your dedication to developing ethical leaders of character is truly an inspiration to us all. And what I don't think you know by now is that you're my new BFF. From a learning perspective. And again, let's give Dr. Feagin a round of applause. Thank you so much. Thank you all for having me. I'm going to take my seat so that I can learn from you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhonda. And I couldn't have said it better. And what a great inspiration you have been to all of us. And we are going to learn a lot from each other. I would encourage everybody to take advantage of those opportunities to learn from the people at your tables, to learn from anybody here. We'll talk more about that tonight at the reception at our house, how you should take the time to meet as many people as you can here, because there's some incredible people. Many of the people in this audience should be on the stage giving presentations. So take advantage of those networking opportunities too. Without further ado, to draw out all the pearls and orchestrate this fabulous forum, as she's done in years past with great aplomb, we're going to introduce Leah Hood. Leah, take it away.
Thanks, team. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. All right, so the party's already started. This is good, this is good. As Rhonda said, Our theme for this year's forum is influencing without authority. Influencing without authority. And like we have done at all of the forums in years past, we're here to learn from lots of different disciplines. So when I'm not orchestrating the Feagin Forum, I get to do leadership development with organizations around the world. And if there's one thing that I have found that's true, is that while every one of those organizations is special, they're not really that unique. We are all facing really similar challenges in the world. Things are moving faster, they're more complex, they're more uncertain, and we are all, as leaders, trying to figure out, what do we do about that? And how do we change the nature of the conversation, whether we're in charge from the top or whether we're seeing some challenge that the place is facing from the middle, so that we can make that change get started, right? Have some influence on creating that world that we want to see. So this weekend, we get to hear stories and examples and inspiration from lots of different disciplines. Of course, from medicine, but also from business, also from the military, also from sports. And we're gonna do what we can to try and pull those pearls from all of the different domains and see how we can learn from one another. Often what I find is that I learn the most when I hear something from a discipline that I'm not as familiar with, that I can apply into my own. So I encourage you to do that. And we'll have the opportunity at your tables for you to have some conversations as we go along about what you're hearing and what you're pulling from things. All right, so in addition to curating a great set of speakers and panels, which Dean does every year, as he said, this is our chance to have the Feagin leaders, right? You're Feagin leaders now, almost, right? Like in a day and a half. They get to graduate from scholars to leaders. It's special time. We get to hear about the work that they have done over the course of the year. So in addition to having some workshops that they do and some individual coaching that they get to really enhance their leadership, a main focus of the work of the Feagin scholars is a set of projects where they can start flexing those muscles of leadership in a group setting. Now, they're given topics, kind of, sort of, at the beginning of the year that they then get to explore and shape and figure out how they want to influence it and make a difference around, right? So early on in the spring and summer, the Feagin Advisory Council and Leadership Board get together and start brainstorming some ideas about what these group projects could be. And for our first set of scholar projects, I'd like to invite group 4 up to get yourselves ready. We have Pat Sweeney to thank for the topic. Yep, well done. And Pat said something like, you know, there's a lot of conversation going on in medicine right now about the sort of profit-based model of delivering medicine and how that fits in with patient-centered care. Maybe we should do something around that. That's what they got. All right, team 4, take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that introduction. So again, this is Team 4, and we're affectionately known within the Feagin Leadership Program as the Super Canoes. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. So our group is going to talk to you today about Is Free Surgery the Way to Go, which is an examination of the impact of product access here at Duke Health. My name is Tony Fuller, and my teammates, we have Sierra, we have Teresa, and we have Devin. 2 of our other teammates, unfortunately, are not able to be here, but they're here in spirit. So to get us started, we're going to go through today sort of what the call to action, and you already talked about that a little bit, that the Feagin Leadership Program gave our team. Then how we develop our approach to try to answer this topic, and then what what is Product Access of Durham County, just so that everyone in the room actually knows what we're talking about. And then talk a little bit about what we found and some conclusions from this research. So many of you have seen this picture on the left. And so when we were given this idea of patient-centeredness versus profit, or the idea of these two concepts, the first thing that came to mind, which may be on some people's minds here, is sometimes this relationship is seen antagonistically, where you have patient-centeredness and profit are battling each other for supremacy when you look at healthcare. For us, we wanted to take a step back and get away from that false dichotomy and really understand how can you develop sort of a leadership model that is inclusive of both and evaluate that. So we took a step back and we just examined what does patient-centeredness actually mean when you're looking at sort of healthcare. And so for us, we thought this model was a great example. So it shows patient-centeredness right in the center and the core of what it means to be a leader within healthcare. And so patients are always supposed to be the center of all the decisions that we're making. And so that is what we use as our concept for patient-centeredness. For profit, it's fairly easy calculation. You have your revenue minus your expenses, you get profit. But when you look at Duke Health and when you look at our healthcare system as a whole, things are much more complicated and a mess. So this is just a representation of a network analysis of how profit works at Duke. So when you look at this, what you see is that Duke Healthcare is split up into different divisions. We have different hospitals. We have different partnerships throughout North Carolina and Durham County. We have the partnerships with the Lincoln Community Health Center. We have our clinical physicians that work through the PDC. And then also a portion of Duke's sort of patients are part of the accountable care organization that Duke has. And so when you look at that, the idea of profit gets a little bit more harder to tease out. So when we got all of this, we developed our sort of first leadership lesson, which is when you're given a topic and you're trying to figure out what to do, the first step you're going to run into is that you lack some kind of knowledge or expertise in that area. So you need to research it to get that knowledge, and you need to reach out to the experts in the field. And so that's exactly what our team did. So we did a lot of research trying to figure out what's the best way to approach this topic, and then reached out to experts across Duke Health in order to develop our plan. So our approach was rather simple after that. So we took a couple of steps. Our first one was just to narrow our focus. So our particular team has a bunch of people who are either in surgical subspecialties or are going into surgical subspecialties. And so from that standpoint, we thought the best way to really look at patient-centeredness and profit would be to figure out how does Duke Health provide health care to the uninsured population, especially when you're talking about providing specialty surgical care to those individuals. So we chose that as sort of a representative case. Then we needed to go out and figure out how do we examine that. So luckily for us, there's a program here at Duke called Product Access of Durham County, and they do exactly that. They allow for the uninsured population to get specialty surgical care, and we're going to go in a little bit more depth about exactly what product access is. Once we found our case, the next step was figuring out how do you actually examine this topic. And so we developed sort of a research strategy that was a mixture of quantitative and qualitative aspects, and we're going to talk a little bit about that further. So I'm going to let Devin kick us off with talking about product access.
Thanks, man. All right, guys, thanks for coming out today. As Tony mentioned, I'm Devin. I'm one of the sports medicine fellows here in orthopedic surgery. So like I was, I'm sure there's a bunch of you out there who don't actually know what Project Access is. Well, in fact, it's actually a nationwide program that has been in place now for a number of years. There are about 17 different Project Access centers across North Carolina, one of which, of course, is in Durham, and that was started in 2006. And so when you look at the population of Durham itself, there are about 20,000 people in this city who have an income that's less than 200% of the federal poverty level and who are uninsured. And so from there, these people are eventually going to be patients at one point in their life, and they need some sort of coverage. And so this is what Project Access provides these people. So currently, they serve about 2,500 patients, majority of which the care is provided at Duke. And the patient care and the management team is all orchestrated through LATCH, which is Local Access to Coordinated Healthcare at Duke University. And so when we looked at that, our research objectives started to take shape. From there, we determined that our first one was going to be determine the potential differences in needs of the PADC patients compared with patients with other payer forms, such as insurance or Medicaid. And secondly, the identifying firsthand the provider experience behind this program, and so trying to get both sides of the story from Project Access. And so as we did this, we sat around a table and brainstormed all about it, and we figured, well, you know what, this probably won't be that difficult. It'll take a couple months, we'll get it all sorted out. And just like I'm sure a lot of people in this room have been involved in other projects, maybe academic research side, it always takes about 10 times longer than you think. And so it really demanded a lot of patience from our side, a lot of teamwork, and then from there we were able to get a good plan together. And that looks a little bit like this. So the first step was a chart review, and this was retrospective in nature, and what we did is we would separate our samples and do a comparison. And we'd focus only on orthopedic surgery. And so we had 3 groups, so the Medicaid patients, the uninsured patients, and of course the PADC Project Access patients. We would extract all of the basic demographic data from these encounters and then run a statistical analysis using the Fisher analysis, the chi-squared test, and of course some fancy logistic regressions. And then the other side of this coin was going to be the qualitative side that was instrumented through a survey. And Amanda, who's not here, actually designed the survey through the Qualtrics software that would actually be a mobile-friendly survey, because we all know that specialists aren't going to do a survey unless they can do it as they're walking from one case to another, or eating somewhere or something like that. So it was very accessible, and we thank Amanda for her expertise there. And so it's a provider survey only. It basically gets them to describe their experience and their satisfaction with participating in Project Access and share some of their patient success stories. So now Teresa's going to take it away.
Hi, I'm Teresa Williamson. I'm a 4th-year neurosurgery resident. And so picking up with our 3rd leadership lesson was that we really needed to divide and conquer at this point. We had a lot of work to do, and so our team decided to kind of split between the survey portion and the data portion, which I think was really effective, and then also bring a lot of people in to the project from around the health system, which we found people around the health system just to be extremely helpful. So we decided that our lesson from this was that working effectively in teams is all about delegation, trust, communication, and utilizing each member's skills. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the first results that we got from the comparison between Project Access patients, Medicaid patients, and uninsured patients. So the main purpose of this slide is just to show you that there's kind of a unique socio-demographic background to each group of patients. And I think that's particularly true of the Project Access patients. So there are lots of factors that go into taking care of people that don't have insurance, and we can't pull them all from a database. So we have a breakdown of race, a breakdown of male, female, and then also the age as well. One of the first things we wondered was, if you have Project Access, are you still likely to get surgery? And so we looked at actually a comparison of consultations and then surgery. And so we looked at how many patients in each group just got consultations and how many patients went on to actually have surgery. And we sort of calculated an operative rate from that. And I think that the question here was about utilization and whether or not Project Access patients were able to get surgery if they needed it. There's overall less number of patients. You see 111 here in the surgery no group and 37 in the surgery yes group for the Project Access patients. But when you look at the rates of surgery, they actually aren't very different between the 3 groups. So that was one thing that we felt like was a positive between these groups. So especially between PADC and Medicaid patients, they were different than no insurance patients, but they were not different from each other. So I think the thing that's helpful to know there is that Project Access patients, similar to Medicaid patients, are getting access to surgery. The next thing we looked at was rehab visits, and especially having some physical therapists on our team who were kind of interested in what the experience is of Project Access patients even after they go ahead and have the surgery. And so we found something interesting here. For patients that have Project Access, outpatient rehab is actually very available, and there were more outpatient rehab visits in Project Access patients than there were in other types of insurance. However, inpatient rehab experiences, we only had one occurrence of inpatient rehab for Project Access of Durham County patients versus the Medicaid patients and the uninsured patients. The next thing we looked at was actually from some of the feedback that we got. I think people worry when they are taking care of different groups of patients that may have more comorbidities or more issues with stable housing, that, you know, while they're going to have so many more infections or so many more complications. So we looked at infection rate for this population and saw actually that there was a difference between PADC Medicaid and no insurance, but PADC and Medicaid were again similar in their rates of infection. I think another important thing to point out here is that when we put this into a logistic regression model and we use race or we use markers of socio-demographic status, we actually can change the results of these studies. And so one of the things that the Project Access folks and the community health doctors that worked with us on this project were sort of instilling in us is that it's really hard to do this type of analysis without being able to acknowledge all the variants that go into taking care of patients without insurance. So some of the potential differences for Project Access patients, one of the big ones to look into in the future would be rehab utilization, particularly inpatient rehab utilization. It seems like we've done a great job with getting patients physical therapy outpatient that have Project Access in comparison to those that do not have insurance. So if you're better off with Project Access, it seems like, than if you had no insurance in terms of rehab, for sure, for outpatient. For inpatient, however, I think that's an area that we could still work on, in particular, acknowledging whether or not if these patients do need inpatient rehabilitation, that we are able to get them that access. I think the number of operations was less in Project Access, and that just reflects the need to expand and get more patients involved. There was no rate difference in the number of the percentage of surgeries that happened. Infections also, the Project Access group and the Medicaid group had a similar rate of infection. And so I think some of this is addressing some of the biases that might take place and showing in the data that outcome-wise things can be very similar. And then in future, we'd really like to see some of the variants that may underlie these differences better explored and looking at the social determinants of health particular to this population and thinking about that in terms of their surgical outcomes. And when we think about that, it's not always possible to analyze that through a chart review. And so that's why we transition now to the survey of the providers to see what their experience is in taking care of patients with Project Access.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Sierra. I'm a physical therapist. So I'm the Division I Athletics Physical Therapy Fellow here at Duke. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about kind of that the qualitative side of things. So what is the provider's experience participating in Project Access? So like Devin mentioned, we created a survey and sent it out through Qualtrics to every provider that has seen at least 2 PADC patients. And of the 415 providers, we got 89 responses back, which we were relatively happy with. We had 17 different questions, and they were either like a 0 to 10 scale, yes, no, or we had some open-ended questions just to get a little bit more feedback from the providers. So the first question was, on a scale of 1 to 10, how effective do you think PADC is in providing quality medical care to individuals who are uninsured? And so what we have here, 1 being at the top of your screen and 10 being at the bottom of your screen. So in general, you know, providers are feeling that PADC is a good program to provide access to or provide care to the individuals who are uninsured. Next question being, do PADC patients have more unmet care and management needs compared to patients with public insurance? And so in this case, providers felt that they had some more unmet care management needs compared to patients with public insurance. Then we kind of asked some open-ended questions to get a little bit more feedback of what that is. And so they said these are patients with a larger burden of chronic disease that is less well controlled. Some of our quantitative results may kind of disagree with that statement, but in this case, that's one of the things that the providers felt. So food insecurity, mental health, and then stable housing as well. They felt kind of play a role in PADC patients having a less optimal in those areas. Next question was, I feel like Project Access patients have comparable outcomes compared to patients with public insurance. And in this case, they were pretty sure that, or confident that most of the time they had about the same or as good of outcomes as individuals with public insurance. Do you feel your donated care has made a difference? So are providers feeling like their care is actually making a difference in the lives of these patients? And in this case, it was, again, mostly positive experiences as far as that goes. So either in the neutral or good category, I would say. And then another one, what are the barriers that you encounter when caring for PADC patients? And this was kind of an open-ended question, so we could get some more kind of feedback for our project, but as well as a lot of our results we're sharing with the PADC so they can kind of help to continue to improve their program. And I think one of the things that was most noted in the survey was just the individual's ability to make it to clinic. So as far as transportation issues goes, that was probably one of the biggest barriers. And a few of them even mentioned suggestions about providing transportation or figuring out a better means to actually get the patients there, because that seems to be kind of one of the major barriers to them actually having good care is just the ability to physically get there. Getting their medications paid for, and so the Lincoln Community Health Center does pay for some of their medications and help to provide that, but oftentimes physicians, some of them weren't even familiar with what PADC was, and so they weren't necessarily sure which medications they were able to prescribe to their patients, so that was kind of a barrier for the provider and just maybe not having enough information. So that would be something that we'll chat with the PADC about and certainly give their feedback so they can maybe communicate with the providers a bit more about that as well. So overall, how satisfied are you with this community-wide effort to provide care for low-income uninsured patients? And again, people were quite satisfied from the provider side of things. And then just some more suggestions for improvement. So these are just kind of our free response questions that we had. So PADC is a great start, but it needs to be expanded. More clarity needs to be provided to patients and providers on what they can and cannot do or provide for. So that kind of goes back to our medications that we just mentioned. And then providers who want to give extra time should have a way to participate beyond what Duke may or may not funnel our way. There were actually multiple providers that made a statement very similar to that. Some more suggestions for improvement: increase advertisement of program to Duke providers, so just giving the Duke providers a little bit better understanding of what PADC is, and then increasing awareness about the positive outcomes, so perhaps sharing some patient success stories. So here's a patient success story. I was referred a Spanish-speaking patient with cervix cancer and was able to successfully complete her surgery thanks to Project Access. She is cancer-free and doing great. And final thought from one of our comments is, I find very few barriers in caring for these patients. I actually think that the outcomes for these patients are superior to patients with public insurance. The patients are very appreciative and are more likely to follow up with care plans and appointments once they are in this program.
So I want to bring us back to what we found as one of the main leadership lessons from this. And so within healthcare, there's multiple competing interests. There's multiple competing goals. And one of the things that was necessary in order for success, taking care of patients while running an organization, is that strategic alignment of everyone's goals. And so we found that to be really important. And we got better at that towards the end. We bring in various experts. And so that strategic alignment for us was really important for us to be able to complete this study and then also to work further even after this, to work with the PDC, to work with the PADC, Product Access, in order to figure out how to sort of advertise better of this program and then additionally improve the program as a whole to provide this type of care. So our group wants to acknowledge all of the folks who helped to support this work. So definitely Dr. Feagin for the namesake and providing the sort of leadership for this program, providing us with this mantra that we kept in our mind as we were going through this process of doing the right thing at the right time for the right reason. Dr. Taylor for the support in running this program, and then of course the people for our small team that really helped us throughout. So Dr. Doty, Dr. Cook, and Dr. Hawk, and then our partners that we had in the PADC, the PEDC, and then all the people who made Feagin leadership program sort of work. And then our fellow scholars who provided support and also some suggestions along the way. And this is just a picture of our group. So the Super Canoes comes from the fact that we had a leadership sort of team thing at the beginning, and our group made some cucumber canoes with chicken breasts inside. So we wanted to leave you with that and open it up to any questions that you have. Thank you.
All right, do we have questions for our team? Who wants to kick us off? All right.
Thank you. That was a great job. I'm Joe Calandra from Charleston. So I guess the question, I'm a little bit not confused. So I know how patients get signed up to Medicaid. And there's the process that they have to go through. And then there's patients that don't go through the process that are uninsured. So what's the process for a patient to get into the PADC program? That's one. And on the other side, are there specific physicians who also volunteer to be in that program?
Yeah, so the answer to the first question, so the way that most patients get into the product access is through the Lincoln Community Health Center. So there are patients there and they're identified as people who have a particular need. And so in order to even get into product access, you have to have a primary physician, and that primary physician is at Lincoln Community Health Center. So they identify patients that have a need, they link them with product access, and then the rest of that process sort of flows from there. When it comes down to the second question, so the providers that actually provide the care for product access patients are actually just the people who are part of the PDC. So it's actually just one of the things that happens in terms of providers. So some of the providers didn't know about the program. They see the patients, but they didn't know about it because they're just regularly in their sort of clinic flow. So that's how that aspect, and that's why the advertisement and then being able to choose to do more was what we found in the provider survey.
Just to add one thing to that, another way that they get identified is through the emergency room. So if a patient comes in with emergency room with no insurance and is not able to get on Medicaid, then they sometimes can be referred through social work there. And we actually saw in our data that patients that join Project Access have less emergency visits than uninsured from the time that they start in the program.
A great job, canoers. Keith Kenner from Kalamazoo. And I might have missed this. I think you described that the providers that you looked at were surgeons. Is that correct?
Correct.
So one of the challenges that I hear from our primary care colleagues is the ability to maintain continuity. So as a consultant, as a surgeon, they'll come in, I'll take care of the problem, and then they're discharged from my care. I would submit or maybe challenge you to look at a broader group of primary care physicians and see how we can optimize this group of patients. And I'd like your comments.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent sort of comment. And I think this is exactly why Product Access was started, because it isn't just providing that specialty surgical care. The main component that I think makes it work most effectively is that they actually do have this person at Lincoln Community Health Center that's their primary physician that's meant to follow them up afterwards. So being sort of maintained in the program, one of the things is that they have to see that physician before they're actually shuffled on to the specialty person, and then they go back after they've received the surgery to that clinic to receive their continuous care. And the benefits that they get from from being at Lincoln Community Health Center is sort of that sort of care coordination. And as we brought up a little bit, Lincoln is able to help provide them with the access to the medications that help to prevent some of the negative post-operative outcomes that you might see in patients who didn't have access to medication. So there is sort of that network established. I think one of the things that probably would be an expansion possibility is how to get some of those primary care providers at other locations, because right now almost all of those providers are just at Lincoln Community Health Center. Yeah, certainly.
Yeah, who funds it? Who pays the hospital, and are the physicians compensated and the other providers?
So from a physician perspective, as I alluded to, if you're part of the PDC and you're working sort of clinically with them, it's actually just part of the clinical flow. And so that's how the compensation happens from that side. How the rest of the dynamic works in terms of how these patients are covered. So Product Access does have sort of its own funding for doing some of the care coordination, but it's this partnership that they've established between Lincoln Community Health Center and Duke Health that helps to sort of cover the other additional cost. We didn't get to go into the depths of that sort of cost side of things as much because it was very convoluted to figure out who was paying what. So Duke Hospital itself helps to provide some of the sort of space and all of that for the care that's provided. And then the providers are donated their time through the PDC to cover the surgeries themselves. So A lot of this is sort of a mixture of this, and the overarching way that Duke Health is able to do something like this is the fact that it's part of that ACO that I talked about earlier, and some of these patients fall into sort of that category, and therefore that's some of the components, and it's a little bit more, for us at least, a little bit more complex to figure out that part of things, which is why we didn't present it.
For example, the surgical implants, they donated?
I think the PDC donates all care.
Yeah, so the PDC donates all care and all necessary sort of supplies for those procedures. Or
My name is Bill Futrell from Pittsburgh, and I've spent my life in plastic surgery. And I'd like to comment about some relationships that we see that some other forms of medicine don't. In plastic surgery, we were one of the first specialties, if you will, that had a fee-for-service basis. Most people divide plastic surgery into legitimate, worthwhile, reconstructive surgery, and this other frivolous part of life that is paid by patients. And I would like to say that in my experience, I feel that's the dignity part of surgery that we provide. And what I've seen in my own practice reward from surgery was the value of things. One of the disappointments in healthcare among patients today is, I don't know what it cost. I want to make sure I did the right thing. I paid enough for it. I have my insurance. But that formula is wrong, and we have to figure it out. But I suggest it's not looking at how do we give free care. That there is no free care. There's no free anything.
Yeah.
And the dignity to receive free care, you take away somebody's dignity. And people want to be involved in it. Now, when you're sick and have to have emergency I mean, there's a way to do it, but it's not to look at there's an underserved population and that population needs to get free care. No. They need to be taken care of with dignity in a way that they don't want free care. I mean, we all like a perk occasionally, but basically people want to feel that they earn the service and the goodwill, and enough said by me. But I would just say that I'm proud of plastic surgery, and as I see a lot of healthcare evolving now, there is a way to put a value on what the services are provided and come up with a way to have some kind of exchange of value for users of that service. Thank you.
Yeah, just want to thank you for that comment. And I think that gets at our initial question of like, is free surgery the way to go? So whether or not sort of the point that you brought up sort of falls within that question for us. So we were trying to examine that. The cost side we weren't able to dig too deep into, but thank you for that comment.
It is a complex issue.
Yeah.
And I think that is I think what your presentation showed and what this comment reinforces is that we're just scratching the surface here.
Yep.
So please join me in thanking our canoers for their work. All right, so next we get to turn from what we have learned from our scholars to our first foray into some learning from the business world. So we have two gentlemen here today from Johnson & Johnson who are going to share their stories of influencing without authority. So J&J has what I find is a really interesting program called the Office of Creative Engagement. I wish I had one of those where I work. The Office of Creative Engagement. So the purpose of the Office of Creative Engagement is to essentially encourage employees around J&J to get curious about ideas and innovations outside of their roles, outside of their functions, outside of their lines of authority, and to learn from one another about what other people are doing, what other people have been able to accomplish. One of the ways that they do this at J&J is through a series of TED Talks. So J&J actually has a TEDx conference that they sponsor and help some folks like Derek and Jay, who you'll get to hear from, develop their stories into these kinds of talks. So what we're going to do here, that worked really nicely. Look at, see how all that happened back behind me. That was lovely. Didn't see any of that. So we're going to hear two of these talks. We're going to start with Derek, and then we'll move to Jay. As Dean said earlier, I'm not going to say a whole lot about these two. Their bios are in your books if you want some more detail, but I'd rather you listen to them and hear about their stories and what they have been able to accomplish because they saw something, they saw a need, and they chased it. We're going to hear both of their stories, and then you will have the opportunity to ask them some questions when they are done. So be jotting those down as they are talking. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Derek.
So again, my name is Derek Fetzer. I've been working with Johnson & Johnson since 2005. Originally, I'm an industrial engineer who Forrest Gumped his way into public health. Okay, so I want to talk about where it all started. And back on the date 12/12/12, at an event, TEDx J&J, that is the Office of Creative Engagement at J&J, they sponsored an event. And it was really to break down the silos and get people to know each other. And, you know, I was curious. I went and I met our IT people there. And up until that point, I did actually live in a silo. And I thought IT really was about aggravating my life through my laptop. Okay. And I was just blown away with what they were capable of. And so a month later, I took them with me on a trip to a shantytown in Lima, Peru. And in this shantytown, there was a very high incidence and prevalence of tuberculosis. And in the center there, you can see stairs leading up. You can see that there's probably no potable water around, no running. The electricity that you see is probably stolen off the grid, right? And this community has been hard hit by tuberculosis, and healthcare volunteers have to deliver those medications on a daily basis to people throughout this community. This community is 1 million people. So it's not, you're not just looking at a small section, you're looking at a small section of a very large population afflicted by tuberculosis, and probably one of the hardest hit in all the Americas. So the IT team, and there you can see us, one of them in the background there, I'm in the middle. And we were going through the shantytown to really understand what was the nature of the problem, what's going on. And really, I want to just show you really the healthcare volunteer here that guided us. And she is a hero. You can see that she's half my height. She's probably a fourth my weight, 20 years older. And she delivered these medications every day. Now, I have a very limited attention span. And I asked her, so how long have you been doing this? I'm just curious. And she says, oh, I've been doing this for 20 years, every day. And I thought, my God, how does she maintain the energy? How does she do this? And I asked her that, and she said, well, 20 years ago, I had tuberculosis. I was sick, I was poor, and I was all alone, and I do not wish that on anybody in the world. And then she's looking at me and my team from J&J, and you know, I'm obviously overfed, and my team slightly. And so, but she asked us a question. How can J&J help us, right? And it's kind of embarrassing to trust, try to explain, the difficulties involved for a large multinational organization, and we can talk about legal and compliance and blah, 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 but it falls short, really, when you're talking to somebody who's been so devoted for 20 years delivering medications on a daily basis to thousands of tuberculosis patients. So really, the broader question is, how does J&J help out all these great nonprofits and their associated healthcare volunteers? How can we help them out? And we really thought about this a lot. And we thought, well, we have great IT. We have a huge IT infrastructure. We have our marketing capability. We don't have boots on the ground, which is what these nonprofits do really well, getting the care to the person that needs it immediately. So we came up with crowdfunding, right? And really that lets us do something we can do well and marry it up to something that the nonprofits do well, right? That point of care. And so with that, I want to just kind of introduce with a video what we've built.
We go somewhere Meet someone.
Learn something new.
Read a little.
Watch a lot.
Make friends.
We follow.
We lead.
And suddenly,
we realize how much we care.
We don't want to just make a difference.
We want things to change for good.
Alone, we care quietly.
But together, we care out loud.
Because caring is where change begins.
So we launched the platform in September of 2016 at the Global Citizen Festival in New York City at Central Park. Since then, we've had tremendous success. And of the 500 crowdfunding platforms that are out there, right, you might ask, well, what do we bring to the table? And so I would just answer shortly, of the many different benefits that the platform provides, one is credibility. So imagine that you are a person that's passionate about a certain project, a certain type of healthcare priority, and you're looking for funding and you're talking to people that you know, and you're saying, you probably haven't heard of my organization, but we're doing great work in this far corner of the world, right? And so, everybody has the crazy cousin who's done, doing something phenomenal someplace remote, right? But imagine that you can come and now you can say, my project has been approved and it's on an award-winning Johnson & Johnson platform, and it's been approved by a group of experts from recognized institutions like Duke, like Johns Hopkins, like Harvard, et cetera, right? So and you can see my project on the platform and exactly what we're about and what we're going to do. So that's really what the platform provides. And since the launch, almost $800,000 has been provided to a lot of the nonprofits around the world. There we go. Thanks. So actually, this was taken earlier this week. We're actually almost on the cusp of the $800,000 mark. And I think that's something that's very important, is to realize you have $800,000 that in the US might not sound a lot, but in other parts of the world, how many people does that affect and touch? So, for example, even within the United States, here was a case of one nonprofit whose founder, his daughter died from lack of a flu vaccination. So now he's working to provide flu vaccinations for the uninsured and the underinsured. In this case, in Rwanda, there was a J&J scientist, a researcher, who actually made a machine to create sanitary pads made from recycled banana tree fibers. And so this project was to help fund that equipment being installed in Rwanda. The point being of this is that it keeps women, girls in school. They were missing about a week, a month because of this issue, and this solved it for them. So it impacts not only the health, but it also impacts their education. And here we have the case of a J&J employee who was actually going to Uganda to adopt a child, and when she arrived, the legislation in Uganda switched, basically changed, and said, you have to stay in Uganda for 1 year to adopt a child. So that's impossible for that family to do that. So what they did was, we'll adopt the orphanage. So through this project, they're going to take care of the 60 children in that orphanage. So this is what I love about crowdfunding, about what we're doing, because it allows ordinary people like you and me to have extraordinary results on people around the world and reach out. It can be a virtual community or your actual local community. So here we are back in 2013, and just to kind of recap, there's John Brennick and myself. This is the artist rendition. We didn't have a lot of budget at the time. Okay, so it's back in 2013 where it's just an idea, and crowdfunding wasn't even mainstream. So a lot of the questions that we were getting at the time is, what is crowdfunding? I don't get it. That'll never work, right? And now it's 2018, and here we are. We are a crowdfunding platform affecting thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of lives across the world, right? And again, I'm an industrial engineer, and the co-founder, John Brennick, was an expert from pricing. We knew nothing about crowdfunding, or we're not experts in public health. But we're so thrilled to be working on this. And so I think about, as I just want to talk a little bit about the theme, which is influencing others without authority, right? Key number one is, I would say, really understand the context and the need. Everybody needs money. If I just go back to our case, yeah, of course, everybody needs money. What's so special about crowdfunding in this context? And if you think about it, when we were on that initial project in Peru, we're J&J, there's a nonprofit there, but then there's also a nonprofit, it's a corollary nonprofit here in the States, and we have a J&J in Peru. So now we have to basically align the 4 organizations about trying to do something. And those challenges were impeding the funding, right? There's a bit of brinkmanship that goes along with any organization that basically say, we'd love to do this, but we'd love you to use more of your resource than ours, right? So that's very typical. Crowdfunding was a way to alleviate tension on this. The next one is really articulating the vision, right? And so if we think back to 2013, you just couldn't blindside people and say, we want to do crowdfunding for public health. And people would look at us, you had to actually say, look, through crowdfunding, we can empower our organization to immediately impact millions of underserved people. At this point, they still don't know what crowdfunding is, but they like the benefit, right? Now that I understand the benefit, keep talking, right? And then at that point, you can say, there are some real strong reasons to believe this vision. Now are they excited? Are they getting engaged, right? I want to know more. Tell me, now that I understand the vision and now that I understand some of the reasons to believe this, tell me more, what is this crowdfunding, right? And then we get into the conversation. This was really key because we spent a lot of time just trying to get to this point, this one slide. And it was very effective because what would happen is I had to sell this to the upper management, that is this idea. And basically, I was being told, it's going to take you, you're going to need an hour, it's going to be a hard sell. You walk in with what the vision, what the benefit is, and you can activate their imagination. The first senior VP that saw this, in 10 minutes, he said, we got to do this. Just tell me more of how to get there, right? And it only took 10 minutes. The next key, I would say, is really show your commitment. And so from an executive coach, I really love this story because it really stayed with me over the years. And he said, imagine you're going into a large crowded room and you need to get to the other door. You can kind of, force your way through it, or you could say it in a loud, booming voice, say, excuse me, I need to get to the door. And then people will accommodate. People will actually make way for you, or some might even come out of the woodwork to help you out, right? Why do you need to get to the door? Tell me what's going on. How can I help? So it's really show your commitment, and it has to be exemplified and communicated in everything you do. At the end of the day, you don't want to come across as saying something like, I'll do this if you do this and they do this, and if everybody pitches together something, this great thing could happen. I find that's a little bit weak. You have to go in and say, I am doing this. Can you help? Yes, no, move on. And to that effect, I wouldn't even waste time in, trying to sell people. That is, don't try to convert people, just find the converted. Other people, they might, as the project progresses, they might come and help and want to help you out. So really, I would just say, show your commitment. And if they're not going to help out, that's okay. Move on to the next, onto the next people that you want to enroll or you need to enroll. Lastly, I just wanted to share some personal enablers with you. It's going to be, if you're doing something that's different, it's going to be an emotional roller coaster ride, right? And so for that, you need great partners. You need to be working with a core team that's really committed. In this case, all of us were doing this outside of our regular day job, and it's now become our day job. I shy away from the thinking of, of involving people, say, oh, it would be nice to have. Really just focus on who you need to have and get things moving forward, right? Don't take no for an answer. just listen to what the objection is and say, can I address it, and then move on and incorporate that into your vision or into your plans, right? And from just a purely emotional point of view, because when we started in 2013, we knew we had a lot of ground to cover, a lot of people that we had to review, a lot of people that we had to talk to. And I would just ask myself at the very beginning of every day, what is the absolute minimum thing I need to get done today to be one step closer to that? And with that, thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jay.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you. Yes, don't go too far because you're coming back. Maybe, stick around. I don't know if you were like me up front over here, but there were lots of wow going on during that conversation. So jot down some of those thoughts that you had or questions that you had as you were hearing those wow, oh my gosh, wows that I was hearing as Derek was giving his talk. So now we have number 2 story from Jay Kotler. Kind of different context, different need that he saw, but similar, I would say, approach to figuring out how to get something done. Jay.
Thank you. No pressure, guys, but I want lots of wows too and stuff. At 2 in the morning, how often is a phone call followed by good news? My call went a little bit like this. Jay, it's Mom. Your father's in the emergency room. He had a mild heart attack and he's recovering, but for some reason he can't breathe on his own, so he's unconscious and connected to a respirator. Can you come down? Well, this was a surprise. I mean, this is a guy that never needed to go to the doctor's office, much less the emergency room. In fact, let me introduce you to my father, Captain Jack Kotler. He was a pilot in the Vietnam War and saw a fair amount of military action. In fact, I remember one story about how a fighter pilot got shot down and crashed into the jungle. Well, my father swooped in, ran into the jungle, and carried that same pilot back on his own back out to safety. Thank you. There was a wow over here. Another time, he got shot down on Christmas Eve. And after they brought him and his helicopter back to the base, they traced the bullet paths that went through his ship. And they found that one bullet missed his helmet by 2 inches. 2 inches effectively determined whether I'd be here talking to you today. So, after the military, my father had some odd jobs. He flew the governor of New Jersey. He put out forest fires. And then he landed, that's me, that's okay. Poor Josh is gonna have a heart attack here by the end of the day. Thank goodness he's in the right room for that. He flew the governor of New Jersey. He had put out forest fires. He had a bunch of odd jobs. And then he landed the job of his career, working as an executive helicopter pilot for Johnson & Johnson. And he worked here for 27 years. And I remember how proud he always was of our company. In the 1980s, when we had the Tylenol crisis, he told me how proud he was and that this company did the right thing. And you may not recall, but on September 11th, all air traffic was stopped because nobody knew quite what to expect next. But this helicopter was flying because my father was delivering medical supplies that we make to the local area hospitals. So what you may not know, but you might sense now, is that I'm an optimist. And I knew it would only be a matter of time before I had some good news. And about 5 days after my father went into the emergency room, I got some. Now you might think that's my heartbeat right now. It's kind of close, to be honest, but it's not. That's the heartbeat of our little girl we had just learned we were expecting. And so I was so excited, I ran down to the hospital and I told my mom. She was overjoyed. And then I went in to go tell my father, who was still unconscious in the ICU. Well, they said he would hear things, so I leaned in and told him he was going to be a grandfather. And then I even whispered the names we were considering for a boy or a girl. That drove Mom crazy, by the way. So I told him, well, when you wake up, you can tell Mom. Then about 10 days after my father went into the emergency room. Jay, it's Mom. We're losing Dad. If you want to say goodbye, you're going to have to hurry to the hospital right away. I was overcome with grief. You see, I'm an only child, and my father's an only child. We're not just father and son, we were best friends. And so now I found myself having to plan a funeral, help support my mom, and also be strong for my wife who had a new life inside of her. But I just lost my best friend. Maybe I'll just grieve later. But you know, sometimes later never comes. Because most companies offer 3 to 5 days of bereavement, and it takes at least a year to get over a tragic event. And don't get me wrong, I work for a fantastic company, Johnson & Johnson. I love the company, and we offer 3 to 5 days as well. But we also introduced recently a parental leave policy, where we have 8 weeks to welcome a new life into our family. But when it comes to saying goodbye to someone I've known my entire life, I get a few days. Shouldn't we do more? And by more, I don't mean just more time. I mean providing the right resources to those in need when they need it. And finally, most importantly, creating a culture where employees understand what their colleagues might be going through. Here's a great example. My wife actually was a J&J employee when we lost my dad, and she had asked for a few extra days off, which her boss gave to her, but begrudgingly. And when she returned to the office, actually many people wondered why she needed any time off at all, because it was only her father-in-law. Wow. He was more of a father to her than her biological dad. Something needed to change, and I had an idea. We had to change the bereavement program. So I told my wife my idea. She was really excited. In fact, she said those 3 little words. Yeah, no, not I love you. I still hear that once in a while. But go talk to your employee assistance counselor. She probably has an idea how to get you started. So I did. I had a conversation with the counselor. She put me in touch with someone in the employee assistance program. And I remember having a lengthy conversation with this nurse. She told me how well I was doing so soon after my loss, and then went on to tell me about all the resources scattered about the internet. But at the end of the conversation, I felt like my idea had hit a dead end. Well, maybe my pitch wasn't strong enough, or maybe she just didn't feel empowered. But quite honestly, we were expecting a child in a couple months, so maybe it was just time to put this idea up on the shelf, just for a little while. October 11th, the absolute best day of my life as we welcomed our little baby girl into the world. And yet I was sad. And at first I couldn't put my finger on why, and then I realized, oh right, I no longer have my father to share fatherhood experiences with. And of course she'll never meet her grandfather. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, these are all fantastic first holidays for a family with a newborn. Yet there was an undercurrent of depression as I also realized these were the first few holidays without my father, without Dad. February approached, which was his birth month, and coincidentally the 1-year anniversary of his death. I didn't sleep some nights, to be honest with you. But somehow that became the impetus for me to go over, find that idea on the shelf, and try again. All I needed was an opportunity. And you know, sometimes opportunities present themselves in the strangest ways.
Welcome to The Gauntlet, the show that sends your fellow colleagues through a series of challenges as they present their brightest ideas to a panel of J&J innovators in the Court of Knights.
Welcome to The Gauntlet. I'm your host, Jester J.
So yeah, right about now, I guess you've realized, is that the guy talking to me on stage in the jester outfit? Yeah, I do anything for a laugh, guys. The biggest question I usually get after this clip is, do I still have the hat? Thankfully, I do not. Yeah, I know. Well, listen, I had a unique opportunity inside Johnson & Johnson to create a television series where we were trying to highlight new and innovative ideas. And as part of this series, I had the opportunity to participate in a captivating communications course, which teaches you to do TED-like talks. Well, I decided I was going to take that opportunity and really hone my pitch. I also learned the power of storytelling and how it can help to use that to influence. Well, at the end of the class, we all had to give our talks, and I knew mine resonated. I saw a few people wipe away a tear, and a couple others jumped up saying, Jay, you have to do something more with this idea. So, I forgot what I was going to say. So you have to get up and do a little bit more with this idea. Oh, there we go. Most importantly, where's my HR friend? One of the instructors was an HR employee, and she came up to me afterwards and said, Jay, go talk to the head of HR that was responsible for the parental leave policy. She can help you. Well, in case you can't tell by now, I'm not exactly shy. So I reached right out to the senior VP, and she actually put me in touch with another global healthcare VP. And I had a great conversation with this VP. She understood instinctively what I was trying to do. In fact, she correlated the value of a bereavement program and grief management to not only retaining current talent in the company, but attracting new talent. I was so excited. I was just waiting for the next words of what to do. To which she said, you got it. Go talk to a director of mental health that she would soon be hiring. Well, I don't know if you guys are familiar with employee recruitment processes, but they take a while. But I remained persistent and soon had my meeting with this director. I gave my pitch, held my breath, not sure what to expect next. Let's do it. I am excited to tell you that Johnson & Johnson has embarked on a journey to change the way mental health and grief is managed inside the company. I first gave this talk about a year ago. And coincidentally, that's also when the Mental Health Diplomats program was started inside J&J. Now, the point of the Mental Health Diplomats program is twofold. One, to help stamp out the stigma associated with mental health. And two, to help elevate mental health to be as important as physical health, especially in a company that prides itself on healthcare. Now, there are multiple areas of focus inside the mental health program, everything from depression and suicide to anxiety, which I'm experiencing up here now, and even eating disorders, and now grief. So myself and several like-minded colleagues are working through the grief program in the focus area. And as we first met and had discussions and shared our stories, it became clearly evident that my original theory was true. You can't just tack on a few extra days to a bereavement leave policy. You have to do more. That's not enough. Because it could be months or even years later, and then an event will re-arise and reopen those pains and that grief that you felt back from the original loss. For me, again, here's a couple personal stories. Just last month, we welcomed our baby boy into the world, and I'm so proud. I'm so excited. And yes, my wife is a saint for letting me talk to you guys today while she's tending to a 1-month-old and a 2.5-year-old. So yeah, mad props to her. But what I realized this time around was that I wasn't depressed that my father wasn't with me. Actually, for some reason, now I was angry. Because knowing what I know now, I was convinced that he probably could have done things a little bit differently in his lifestyle to ensure that he would be around to take care and see his grandchildren. Of course, that, I guess, makes me feel guilty and mad at myself. Then about a couple months before that, February of this year, we had 2 dogs, 2 cats, 1 child and 1 other child on the way. We were looking forward to the proverbial Noah's Ark. By the end of the month, we learned that our 1 cat was sick and was dying. And let me be straight. This is my wife's cat. He loved her. He tolerated me. But that didn't stop me from doing everything in my power to try prolonging his life, even just a few days. And then when I had to say goodbye to him, I gave him a big hug. And I looked him in the eyes. And I said, I love you. And then I went out. And I sobbed. I cried. And I couldn't understand at first, what is wrong with me? And then I spoke to my employee assistance counselor and realized, yeah, of course, I had every option to try extending his life, but I couldn't do that with my dad. And to compound matters, I was able to say goodbye to this cat and look at him in the eyes, while my father, I had to say goodbye unconscious. So time is not enough. And so our team is actually focusing on raising awareness and training around mental health, grief, and empathy. The goal, we're striving to change the culture, create a culture of kindness, if you will, within inside J&J. We're even doing grief lunches so that those who have recently experienced loss can get together, share their thoughts, share their stories over a meal. And for those who do have employees reporting to them, we have dedicated training we're releasing to help equip them with all the knowledge they need to help their employees during their time of need. during their times of need. Oh, and then we're finally working with our employee assistance program once again. We're taking all the great resources we have around grief and we're putting it in a handy mobile app. And we're even piloting and experimenting with new innovative ideas, like a concierge service. Imagine someone you love and know you just lost them. What do you do first? Imagine instead picking up a phone and talking to a concierge who can walk you through the whole process and take care of all the details, right down to ordering the flowers for the funeral. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create a mentally healthy environment for all of our employees. So listen, I know you guys all have great ideas. With persistence and the ability to influence decision makers, they can become reality. And don't let the fact that your idea is outside your area of expertise ever dissuade you. Believe it or not, I'm an IT professional. I have no idea about HR policies. You don't want me anywhere near them. But as a Johnson & Johnson employee, I felt an obligation to make a change. And at the end of the day, I just hope my father's proud. Not just of me, but once again of our company for doing the right thing for the next generation, his grandchildren's generation. So, just the other night, yeah, I was walking again at 2 in the morning. But believe it or not, I'll take it over a phone call any night. That's it. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Let you have a seat. Here, come on back up. All right, I'm going to hang out up here for this round of Q&A, and I've got 2 folks with mics who are going to be running around. But to get things started, I thought maybe I could ask a question first. All right, so we've got an IT professional and an engineer.
That's right.
Right, okay, right. So both of you saw needs in your organization that were completely unrelated to the jobs that you were in, the expertise that you had, the knowledge that you had, not an HR professional, right?
No.
Play one on TV.
Not at all.
Had either of you ever taken on a challenge like this before? Tried to do something, have this kind of influence this big before? Derek?
Sure. No, not of this magnitude. So I had tried to do things within my own area of expertise, but sometimes, and I think that was a wonderful opportunity within Johnson & Johnson to provide like the Office of Creative Engagement, and then we also had an immersion project where go to the site that is experiencing problems. We don't have any expectation other than just understand what's going on.
What was it about your experience seeing that made you say, okay, just seeing it and understanding isn't enough? I've got to lean in and do something with this now.
Well, I think it was inspired on the healthcare volunteer that you saw, that she was doing so much, and how is it that no help has arrived?
Okay.
The cavalry had not arrived yet. We're supposed to be that cavalry, not only as Johnson & Johnson, but as a healthcare system. How are we helping them? And I'm really happy about the prior presentation we saw talking about that too.
Yeah, great. Good job, Team 4. Keep paddling, right? All right, so Jay, I'm going to come to you, and then I'm coming out here. So have your questions ready. You talked about putting the idea up on the shelf a couple of times. Was there any roadblock that you hit? Any moment where you just said, "No, that one's too hard. I can't make it through it. I've gone and talked to enough people. There's nobody else left to talk to. I'm talking in circles." And if so, how'd you make your way through that?
Yeah, that was the answer. J&J is a great company because everyone wants to help each other, I think, and everyone knows a lot of information, but they always want to also get you in touch with the right person. And so as you kind of saw through my journey, it was being bounced around from person to person to person. And on some projects, I've always been some other projects, I've been bounced back to the original person too, which has come full circle, and you're like, wow. So yeah, no, I think it's very hard to kind of move ahead and try finding those different things. And when I put it on the shelf was because, yeah, we had personal things coming up in my life at that time. Obviously, I couldn't really focus as much, and I kind of hit that roadblock, and I just kind of felt dejected at that point. But I think for me, personally, my father was a J&J employee, as I mentioned. And I've always had that feeling that if he was going to pass earlier than he should have, as a J&J employee, I want to make his memory stand for something. And so I think that's kind of what provoked me again to, listen, I want to push ahead with it. And then it was just good timing to have the opportunity to. It comes down to that a lot of times. It's not always what you know, but it's who you know, and sometimes it's just that unique opportunity where paths cross at the right time.
What do they say? Luck comes to those who are persistent?
That's, yeah, perfect. That's exactly what it is.
All right, so fantastic.
I appreciate you guys modeling how to think outside the box. That's great.
Thank you.
As an orthopedic radiologist and co-founder of Duke Integrative Medicine, I've been specializing in thinking outside the box for several decades. And I was one of the first physicians to practice acupuncture at Duke in the sports medicine clinic of all places. And I'm particularly interested in the relation between emotions like grief and physical health. And through the lens of Chinese medicine, the emotion of grief is connected to diseases of the lungs and the sinuses, and even postnasal drip, as if there's inner crying going on that's not being expressed. And so there's really an epidemic of unresolved grief out there. In the corporate world, think of the people who are missing days of work from sinusitis. In the shanty towns in Peru, the people there are dealing with lung infections, overwhelming grief related to their poverty and all the losses they've had. So I just encourage us to look deeper into that whole concept of emotions and health and look at I like to call them somatic metaphors. In psychosomatic medicine, we're looking at what's going on in your emotions, how does it manifest in the body? And that's a great way to think outside the box that we all can do in our everyday practices. And when you get people come in for sinus conditions, postnasal drip, ask them who they lost. It's a simple place to start.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Jay, have you seen any? You said you've got the what? Not mental health ambassadors. Is that?
Diplomats.
Diplomats. Thank you. Mental health diplomats. Have you seen any stories of positive impact from the work that the diplomats have been having?
It's kind of a new program. We've only been together probably, it started almost a year ago, but we've really started hitting traction probably within the last 3 to 4 months. So we've been doing a lot of chipping away at that mental health stigma mostly, because that's the biggest thing, right? If you have a toothache, you go to the dentist. If you've got another condition, you go to the doctor, and no one thinks anything about that. But if you say, I'm going to go see my psychiatrist, or I'm going to go see my counselor, or something like that, oh, something's suddenly wrong with you, right? And it's not looked at the same way in most cases. So we've been kind of trying to break down those barriers, I think, first right now, and just getting kind of that general awareness out to the enterprise.
Thanks.
But the goal actually of the Mental Health Diplomats program is eventually to not just be inside of J&J. So this whole program actually was taken to Alex Gorski, our chairman, who's completely on board and supportive of the program. So I think the whole goal is to also start weaving it into some more of our work that we do outside of just the enterprise.
Great, thanks. Eric.
Yeah, I want to thank you both also for getting up and sharing this story. I'm interested in looking at the higher level response of your organization. I mean, you had influence where you had no authority, to keep with the theme of this session. Because the company was willing to be influenced. And I think many of us are privileged to hear Alex Gorski come and talk to us in the past, so I'm not surprised that J&J has this as one of their cultural elements. If you go back 20 years ago, though, there were many companies who looked at employees as disposable and would not have allowed this kind of influence. When you go around and talk about your programs, in a wider audience that includes medical people, do you find that business is becoming more supportive and more interested in the quality of life, the retention of high quality employees, such that they're willing to be influenced the way that you influence J&J?
Well, I don't know if all companies. I've been in J&J, and I would say that I've seen that in J&J over the years. There's been a flattening of the organization, and I think people are encouraged rather, to come forward and start working on the needs that they see. So things like the Office of Creative Engagement, where people can come together and there's a space for them to talk and really think, what might we do that is new? what is the need out there that we can address, and it's not coming from the higher echelons of the company. A similar one was the immersion program, where there were teams of people that went to Peru, to Romania, to other places around the world, just to understand the problem and the context, and then they come back and they think, wow, what can we do about this, right? And is this problem translatable to other places? So I think J&J certainly accommodates that, and I've seen since 2005 a lot more, like the diplomats program too, just a lot more concern about health and the health of its employee workforce.
Yeah, and a lot of companies are preaching innovation, right? At the end of the day, because there's only so far you can take products today. You have to come out with the next, blockbuster drug, or you have to come out with the next innovative solution to something, right? And some companies have said, oh, take 10% of your time and be innovative. But I don't think a lot of people necessarily know how to be innovative. And so that's where, the programs like the Office of Creative Engagement and some of the things that we've been doing, where people can get on stage, give a talk like we've done, and inspire hopefully other people in the enterprise to hear that and say, I have an idea, or maybe I have an idea that I haven't thought about before getting out there. Maybe I can now. And I think that's kind of the way we move it ahead.
And that was part of the excitement with Caring Crowd too, is that that it was understood that this is somebody that this is a tool, a platform that not only employees but everybody can employ without asking permission of the company to use. The platform's there and they can use it. So we've seen a number of employees use the platform and working with nonprofits to raise funds for projects that are close and dear to their heart. Right? So I think there's that recognition too from upper management saying we have to create more ways that people can engage and work together without us being there all the time.
Yeah, and I, just to follow on, I'm impressed with that. Again, this is a great sales pitch for J&J. I mean, you might go and apply. But I'm struck by the fact that, to be cold and impersonal about this is not improving the bottom line of J&J at all. In fact, if anything, it's consuming J&J's resources to achieve the needs of its employees, which has great utilitarian value, but as I said before, has not always been a characteristic of especially large organizations.
It's also in our credo, right? So it's the patients and the doctors, and then the employees. The stockholders are the last intentionally on the credo, right? And then if you take care of everything else, the stockholders will be happy at the end of the day too. And that's kind of been the mantra since the 1943 or whenever the credo was first written. So, I think there's a lot to say about if the workforce is engaged and having their needs met, they can be more engaging moving forward too, instead of trying to work through like grief, right? going back to work and just trying to get back into work. You're not focusing, you're not really being your 100% either. So what's the harm of taking some time? We spend a lot of time with work and family too, and trying to balance that. So I think it's just kind of a part of our DNA to a point, Derek. I don't know if you have...
Well, I think there's a belief though. I understand what you're saying, but I think it's more about, is it a short-term or a long-term? So the consumption of the resources, while I understand what you're saying, that might be on the shorter term, but when the company acts in a more humane way, right? It attracts better quality employees. Employees are willing to stay there, to work there. I think at J&J, the average employee stays there longer than other employees in the industry. But I'll also just share, because I think the credo is a very important part of J&J. It's why I came to J&J. And it's also, when I was pitching Caring Crowd, I had to go talk to the vice president of finance. And at that point I thought, this is where the dream dies. He wants to see a return on investment, right? There's no return on investment here. And he looked at it and he said, and again, he went to the vision of this and he just thought, and he said, in 10 minutes, he said, this is a credo type of initiative that we are ideally suited for. I do not see how we cannot do it. And we move forward. It was a 10-minute conversation. And honestly, I thought that, again, it was going back to one of these things where I thought, just take a step every day, we'll see what happens, and take it from there. And I was really shocked of how easy that conversation went.
Right. Not the intent of having these two here, but it is pretty good. I mean, it is pretty good. Huh?
Welcome to have
Yes, over here, and then we'll come up when you're
Sure. Thanks for your comments. I remember the Tylenol problem, and I remember vividly J&J doing the right thing at great expense to the company. And since then, I also remember them doing the right thing with some product recalls, whether they're in orthopedics or cardiac. And I guess my question is, where did that come from, and how are you able to perpetuate that do the right thing when lots of companies all around you are not?
I think it stems again from the credo, and if you're not familiar with the credo, I can't recite it from memory. It's kind of long, but but the focus is first and foremost on the customers, and that being the actual patients, right at the end of the day. Then followed by the caregivers, the nurses, the doctors around the world take care of them. Then the employees, and then the stockholders, right? So first and foremost, it's always about the end customer and enhancing their life and making their life better. I don't know if we've been perfect, because I know I've heard some things throughout too that there probably have been missteps along the ways with some leadership. But I think overall the DNA is around that, and the staunch history of General Johnson and some of the original Johnson brothers from back in the day. It was just kind of it's built into the DNA. I call it the J&J. It's the I bleed the J&J red, right? So it's kind of in the DNA too of the company. I don't know if you can answer anything more specific than that, Derek.
Did the credo come from General Johnson?
It probably did, yeah. But and like I said, the credo is such a foundational thing. We do surveys on it every year to find out how we're tracking against it. We have a ton of programs around giving back to the community. So it's just kind of it's hard to explain unless you're there to a point.
Well, and I would reference also there's a book out there called From Good to Great by Collins, where Johnson & Johnson is a case study on exactly that question. How is it that after 130 years, it's still a great company?
That was actually my question. Okay.
Oh, all right, we have another one over here, please.
Hi, my name is Ashley Wiesman. I'm one of the current Feagin scholars. I really liked hearing about the variety of projects that Johnson & Johnson is involved with, which I think really speaks to our modern era. It feels like every morning I wake up and I read the news and there's a new thing that I need to care about. Homeless women don't have access to sanitary napkins, but sanitary napkins are not regulated by the FDA and should be made of sustainable resources, and I can't be exposed to plastics because the plastics will hurt my growing fetus, and then I can't use plastics because it creates an island and hurts sea turtles. There's so many things to care about. So I'm wondering, how does your organization deal with the variety of needs from these different projects that might even be competing?
That's a great question.
Well, the way I would look at it is J&J is a very decentralized company, okay? And competition's okay, right? And so if somebody on one organization is working on something that might compete with another in another organization, let the best one win. I think that might be the simplest answer. Does that answer your question?
I mean, there's so many things that are going on, like you said, right? And that's kind of what's interesting about J&J. I'm glad you said this decentralized, because there are so many different companies that kind of function on their own, but they kind of bubble up into the J&J corporate entity as well. Yeah, there's a ton of ideas out there, and I don't think there's one single place where it all comes into. I mean, we have J&J Innovation Labs and all these other things too, but it's almost like, yeah, no, it's the codependency is kind of what you're getting at, right? It's like you have this idea, but what's it affect downstream too? So, and I don't know if honestly we have that in play yet, because there's clearly R&D groups that look at what's going on in DePuy, which is the orthopedics division, or within Ethicon, the sutures, or Janssen, or pharmaceutical companies, but. All together, I'm sure there's someone at the top level being paid much better than me figuring this out. But
I would also say that the decentralization plays to leading without authority, right? Because it is not that much of a command and control structure as you'd expect, right? So people can say, I have a crazy idea. I want to see, and other people, hey, I don't think that's so crazy. Let's go for it. Right? And it comes about, and so both of us are standing here because of that.
So great segue into our last question. Eric and others have said, J&J has created a fantastic platform for people like you to raise their voices and make things happen. And you still had to step out and see a need and take that on. So we have this group of scholars here who are getting ready to take the next step in their journey as physicians. What advice do you have for them as they think about influencing, probably without as much authority as they might want to have?
Well, I would say it's scary. You're going to feel exposed, and that's okay. Find people that believe in what you're doing, right? Get your group of core supporters, because you're going to need each other, and you're going to need to really. It's going to be an emotional roller coaster ride. Just talk to each other, and really focus on the need and the importance of what you're doing, right? And it really goes to, it's more about the purpose than the leading, right? It's just be true to the purpose, and you say, I believe in this, and who can help me out? And chances are you're not that special or that unique in that a lot of other people will probably empathize with you, and it will resonate with them as well.
That's great points. I think persistence is key. And also don't be intimidated that if you're kind of new in your career too, because I think a lot of people want to get in there, kind of know everybody, know everything, and understand all the details before I even propose an idea. Just another personal experience, because I like to talk about myself apparently. In the mid to late 90s, some of you might not remember this, but there was a thing called the internet and the World Wide Web. Nowadays, no one cares about that anymore. And we didn't have a website for J&J.com yet. And I was like, why do we not have a website for J&J.com? A lot of our other competitors already do. And so I just took it upon my own initiative to kind of mock up what something might look like. And I happened to be working with the corporate director of corporate communications. And he's like, you did this? Yeah, like in a couple hours. Dude, we got to do this. So it's kind of like aligning, as you said, Derek, too, aligning yourself, finding those right people to align yourself with that can help champion your cause, and influence them. I didn't go to the top and say, hey, Chairman, we need to have a website at the time. Came up from the bottom a little bit more. So.
Or wait for somebody to tell you to do it.
Or wait for anyone. Yeah, if you see an opportunity to fix something, make things better, don't assume someone else is going to do it. So take the initiative and, find someone else to help champion your cause, as you said.
Well, please join me in thanking Derek and Jay for sharing your fantastic story.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. And we now have time
we're taking a break.
To say thank you. So don't go far, gentlemen. Would you like to come up and say a quick thank you?
Hi everyone, my name is Chimo. I'm one of the soon-to-be Feagin leaders. So Derek, Jay, thank you so much for your sharing. Thank you for coming down. Really, I think a lot of the stories, Caring Crowd, and also the mental health diplomat programs, I think echoes a lot of the values of Feagin leadership program. I think it's really an embodiment of the true leadership. So
thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. All right. Well, while they are getting their photo opportunity, I will send us off to a break. So we are going to take, let's see, my watch now says just about 5 of 3. Let's come back at, I'm going to say 3:15. 3:15, 20 minutes.
I hope everybody had a chance to talk with a lot of the people that are here. As I said earlier, we've been listening to the feedback we've been getting from our community of leaders, all of you, that you want to have more time to interact with the people at your tables, the people throughout this room. So we've tried to create more space for breaks, time for discussions. Leah's going to have some small group activities that are going to happen throughout this afternoon and tomorrow. So we'll get a lot more time to do those sorts of things. And less time for individual keynote speakers. But that means the keynote speakers that we do have are extra special. And it gives me a great pleasure and it's a distinct honor to be able to introduce our next speaker, the 18th Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Martin Dempsey. And that's my introduction.
I'll make sure my light's green. I can talk. I'm delighted to be here. Dean and the Feagin team have invited me for several years. The calendar never really cooperated very well, but here I am, and it's a real honor to be among this group. I'm vertical here because of Duke Medicine. I had 2 knee replacements within the last 6 months, the most recent 4 weeks ago. So evidence of the miracle of modern medicine, if it's applied with great skill, and then if you all can convince the patient to bear down on the physical therapy part of it. But I also want to recognize, as everyone should, Dr. Feagin. In 1974, I was a cadet at West Point, and I blew my knee out playing lacrosse. And so they managed to get me over to the hospital there at Duke, the old one, as you remember, not Keller, but the one where it felt like you were walking into an old warehouse or something. And I was operated on the next day by a young Dr. John Feagin. Fast forward, oh, by the way, I didn't have any idea what he was going to do. This is in the days before we communicated with patients, apparently. But I honestly, I said I blew my knee out. I don't know what that means, so we'll go see the doctor. He'll tell me, and next thing you know, I got my leg up in the air, full cast, all that. Remember the pink stuff they used to rub on your leg to take the hair off? I mean, it was carpentry, as I recall, more than anything else. But afterwards, the consult, I said, "Okay, doc, what's the prognosis? Can I play the piano again?" And he said, you may want to pick a branch where you're not going to be putting too much pressure on that thing, because we did a bilateral meniscectomy." And I said, "Oh, you did? What?" And he said, "Yeah, we took all the cartilage out of your right knee, and so eventually, you're going to feel it." And I said, "Well, how soon is that?" And he said, "It's different from patient to patient." So I promptly went into Armor Branch, went to airborne school, became a pretty successful middle distance runner in the 10K circuit in Colorado and other places. And then I hit 50, and I remembered what the good doctor had said to me. He said, "Someday you're going to feel it." And boy, did I ever. But then I was too deeply into that part of my career, I really couldn't unplug. And so I put it off until I retired. And as it turns out, a year ago, maybe 2 years ago now, we were sitting at a Duke basketball game, and who do we happen to be sitting next to but John Feagin? And I reintroduced myself and explained to him where we had last seen each other. And he reached across and grabbed my knee. Now, in normal circumstances, my security detail would have taken exception, but I think they figured out by that time who he was. But he reached over and grabbed my knee, and he said, "Oh, yeah, you're ready." I said, "Okay." So this year I got them both done. But you're a legend, Dr. Feagin, in the military, in the medical community, and just for the way you lead your life. So let me give you a round of applause. Thank you. So my task is to talk to you a little bit about leadership, but maybe more narrowly focused on what you saw flashed up there on the screen a moment ago, which is, let's call it influence without authority. But I want to kind of make a Venn diagram for you and talk about that, plus belonging, plus inclusion, because they're all synonyms of each other, and really it's almost impossible to understand one without the other. And it's important we do so, because I personally believe that leadership today is a lot harder than when I graduated from West Point in 1974. Why is it harder? Well, let me ask you this. Was it Yanni or Laurel? Okay, let's see by show of hands. How many think it was Yanni? And how many Laurel? How weird is that? Like 50%. But anybody in the room not heard it? Okay, you got to get out from under that rock. Turn your iPhone back on if you've got it turned off, and it'll come. It's there waiting for you. And by the way, that's the reason I start this little presentation about Yanni and Laurel is that's a meme. And by the way, the word meme came out of the medical community in 1976, meaning the passing of culture and style, and in fact, disease and the cure for disease person to person, not institution to person. And so if you think about a meme today, you could have something as innocent as Yanni Laurel, pretty entertaining and innocent, but literally everybody gets it, meaning everybody, almost everybody in the room within 48 hours has been exposed to this. Or how about Chewbacca Mom in terms of innocent uses of a meme to entertain? You remember Chewbacca Mom driving her kids to school and decides to put on a Chewbacca mask. Why not, right? I mean, who wouldn't think to put on a Chewbacca mask driving your kids to school? But anyway, she puts it on, and then she gets such a kick out of herself that she starts laughing hysterically. And then as a sign of the times, what does she do? She videos herself driving in the Chewbacca mask, driving her kids to school. And it just goes completely viral. So there's kind of an innocent use of technology to entertain. How about to do good? How about the Ice Bucket Challenge as a meme? Probably many of you in the room participated. I contributed, refused to dump a bucket of ice water over my head. I was the chairman. I had too much dignity to do that. But my wife did. And so she did the pouring, I did the paying. But there's a case where a lot of good came of that meme. Millions of dollars actually raised for ALS. ALS. And then, of course, there's some insidious uses of that technology and memes. ISIS. If you wonder why ISIS is so hard to put down and keep down, it's because their ideology has gone from being a group of, we estimate, maybe 500 individuals that started out in Western Iraq as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and then they were squeezed into the ungoverned space of Western Syria. They changed their ideology, they radicalized it, made it even more extreme, and in so doing attracted disenfranchised people that were tired of living the life they led and thought that the answer was through radical religion, and all of a sudden it became a movement, which is to say multiple groups who kind of formed a consortium. They didn't agree with each other on everything, but they did agree that life was not the way they wanted it to be and that religion was the answer and we're going to break out. And then it became a meme. And that's the problem we've got right now. That ideology is passed not from Aleppo or some particular geographic location, but it's passed through the medium of social media and information and the internet. Now, it's important for me to point out to you, though, that the internet and social media is generally neutral, meaning it'll ride whatever you want to ride on it. But the reason I want to begin my presentation to you about leadership, it's that never before, it feels to me as though leaders are in a competition for the trust and confidence of those who follow them, and more people have access and influence on them than ever before, right? I mean, it's just true. So the number of influencers, you want to get at eventually, how do you exert influence without authority? The first question I would ask you to confront is how many people are you competing with when you're trying to convince your followers to follow you? And why should they follow you? Well, by the way, the other factor is, did you see that study that came out about a week ago that reported that 46% of the population of the United States describes themselves as lonely? Anybody not see that? Go back and look. 46% of the United States. Now, they broke it down demographically, they broke it down by age group, they broke it down geographically. But fundamentally, the assertion is that many people by the way, this is in our country, the most prosperous, free, powerful nation on the planet. And let's just say that the statistics are off by 10%. And that a third of the country describes itself at some level as lonely, which means what? They don't feel like they belong to anything, apparently. That's true of family units all the way up to corporations, all the way, in whatever sector of society you find yourself. So I do think the irony is we've never been more connected. The problem is that the connections are generally used to point out how we're different, not how we're the same. And so in that life, in that environment, you as leaders, and by the way, you're a leader whether you're leading your family, that's a leadership challenge. If you haven't figured that out and you have children and grandchildren, you've been asleep at the switch. That may be the hardest challenge of all, by the way, leading a family. And it may also be without authority when you come right down to it. But in any case, from family to chairman of the Joint Chief, from a director to a corporate executive to the chief executive officer, we're all in a competition for the trust and confidence of those who follow us. And it is a leader's primary responsibility, in my judgment, to make the people who follow you feel like they belong. It's no more complicated than that. And if you can get at that, if you can make those who follow you feel like that they matter to you, that what they do is an important contribution, it sounds simple, doesn't it? But remember, the attention span is shorter, the influencers are greater, and there's just a general feeling that we're focused on what disconnects us, not what connects us. And in that environment, the ability of a leader to establish a sense of belonging among their followers is magic. That's the special sauce. If you want to know why some organizations are high performing and some are mediocre and some are not, it generally comes into how the leader establishes a culture of belonging. I'll tell you one short story, then I'm going to give you a bit of homework here. It's really not homework because I'm going to do it right now. But so I graduated, as I said, in 1974 from the military academy, believing that I was fully prepared to be a second lieutenant, a platoon leader, the things they get you ready to do. And I turned up in Germany. My first assignment was 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment, and our job was to patrol the border, the inter-German border. That is to say, this is a long time ago, but there was West Germany and East Germany. And on our side, it was the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, notably the United States forces. And on the other side was the Warsaw Pact, notably the forces of the Soviet Union. And I showed up at a little base camp way out right in the middle of a German forest, probably 10 kilometers from the border, and 50 kilometers from our normal base camp where we lived when we weren't patrolling the border. And we went to the border about every 45 days or so. And you'd stay up there for 2 weeks, sometimes a month, depending on the time of year and what else was going on. So I show up. Now remember, 1974, many of you who have had military experience will know, not the same military we have today. We were coming out of Vietnam. As you know, the Vietnam War had the population of the United States had become weary of it. We'd taken enormous casualties. It was a draft army. By the way, they were good soldiers generally, but they were being blamed for a war that, frankly, they didn't want any part of. They were drafted into the military. So there was a lot of issues inside of that military, genuine, serious racial issues. There were drug issues that were a vestige of Vietnam, but also that made their way through Turkey and into Germany and into the hands of our soldiers. And this is before we had drug testing and, things that could help you help them. And, if I had 50 soldiers, I probably had 40 of them that were wonderful and 10 that were a real handful, to put it as bluntly as I can. So I'm in this little border camp, and the job of the commander of the border camp was to send out patrols, usually 3 or 4 Jeeps. I'm not talking about Humvees now. I'm talking Jeeps, like, the old Willys Jeep. And we used to very cleverly take the top off of them so you had better visibility and so you could freeze your ass off in the middle of the winter. That was actually why we did that. But we'd send them out, and by the way, they'd go out with a squad leader and, 6, 7, 8, 10 soldiers in 3 Jeeps and a radio and a map. Now, I know some of you have never heard of that, a map. This is in the days before Waze, by the way. So you couldn't say, I want to go to this border checkpoint, and so you put it in Waze, and all the other Wazers are out there helping you get to it. That's not the way it worked. I mean, this was cold, hard navigation by looking at, tree lines and road intersections, and the border wasn't well marked, and that's the point. Because when you had a patrol out as a second lieutenant, you knew the one way to end your career was have a patrol wander into East Germany. And there was fence in some parts, but not all. And so the picture I'm trying to paint for you is, it's high adventure when the patrol goes out. So the patrol's out this one particular Sunday, and in the operations center, And really all I could do was listen as the patrol called in its checkpoints. I'm at this checkpoint. I'm at this checkpoint. But, you know, at least you had a sense that where they weren't and where you didn't want them to be is in East Germany. So, but you're there in case something happens. And the gate guard comes in. Remember I told you we had a lot of drug problems in the unit. The gate guard comes in and he said, sir, I need you to come with me to the gate. I said, I can't come to the gate right now. I'm in the middle of monitoring a patrol that's out. I said, when the patrol's back, I'd be happy to go out to the gate with you. But I said, why do you need me at the gate? He said, sir, there's a nun at the gate. I said, what? He said, I'm telling you, sir, there's a nun at the gate. I said, how do you know it's a nun? He said, she's got all the shit on. I mean, she's got the whole thing. And I said, okay, look. I said, okay, I believe you. He was mad at me because I wouldn't believe him that there's a nun at the gate. And by the way, remember now, we're in the middle of a German forest, 10 kilometers from the border, 60 kilometers from the nearest civilization. And he says, there's a nun at the gate. I said, look, go back and tell the nun I'm a little busy right now. Could she come back some other time? So off he goes. I'm back at focus like a laser beam on the patrol. He comes back and he says, sir, she ain't leaving. And that's when I knew it's a nun. Because if you know nuns, they will not take no for an answer. And so I said, oh my God, there really might be a nun at the gate. So anyway, by this time the patrol is in, it's safe. And so I said, okay, I'll go with you. So I walk out of the gate. And as I'm approaching the gate, sure enough, there's at least something that looks like a nun. You know, 5'2", 5'2". No, I'm not kidding you. Every stereotype that you have of, you know, a little fire plug nun, this was her. And I walked up to the gate and I said, sister, I have to tell you, I am absolutely, who are you and why are you here? But I actually said it and I wove in a couple of German phrases, because remember, I'm in Germany. And she said, I'm Sister Mary Cecilia and I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And I said, what? I said, that's even weirder. What are you doing at my border camp? She said, we have a convent. My order has a convent in a place called Connersreuth. It's about 10 kilometers away. And I've just been assigned here. I heard that you all were here. You Americans were here. It's Sunday. I know you don't have a chaplain assigned to you. And so I came here to pray with you. And I said, wow, sister, that is really kind. But meanwhile, in my mind, I'm saying, oh, hell no. There is something wrong with this, you know. So I was trying to figure out how to buy myself some time. And I said to her, sister, we're in the middle of an exercise. And as soon as I said it, I said, I'm going to hell, because we're really not in the middle of an exercise. But I can't let this nun inside the gate. It's a secure area. So anyway, I said, so I can't deal with this right now. But I tell you this, since you're there and we're here and we'll still be here next week, why don't you come back next week? And she begrudgingly said yes. And I said, and can I get your ride back to your convent? And she said, no, I can make it. And I'm thinking, man, this is really one tough little lady. But off she goes on the forest trail. I go back to the thing and I immediately went to my intel officer and I said, okay, find out if there's any Russian spies dressing up like nuns in the German forest. And the intel guy says, what are you talking about, sir? I said, there was a nun out there. That can't be real. I mean, that's just not possible. He said, all right, sir, but he said they might come out and drag you out of here. You send a report up like that to Nuremberg, which is where our head. I said, okay, maybe rephrase it a little bit and say, is there any reports of, nuns? They don't have to be Russian spies. How about nuns, Anyway, so we ran the whole thing and not a thing on this little nun. So, I was dreading the next Sunday. I'm a product of Irish Catholic schools. You can't say no to nuns. You just can't do it. And so sure enough, the next Sunday, here comes the gate guard. Sir, there's a nun at the gate. I said, I know. I knew she'd be here at some point. And so I went out, and I had already decided I was going to let her in. I didn't ask because, it's not one of those questions you ask some colonel. Hey, do you mind if I give the nun a guided tour of all of our stuff and, show her the secret, So I walked out to the gate, but I said to her, when I said, sister, I'm going to open the gate, but before I do, you got to stick with me, and I will take you from place to place. You can't wander freely in my little camp. By the way, the camp wasn't much bigger than this room, maybe twice as big as this. And I had taken note on my way to the gate. Remember I tell you about I had like 10 soldiers who were kind of rough, just rough. And they were playing basketball on a makeshift basketball thing right here by where the mess hall was. So I walked past them. I went to the gate. I gave the nun, I laid the law down to the nun. Stick with me, sister. I'm taking you around my camp. Okay, Lieutenant, I got it. Gate opens, she bolts. Straight to the basketball court. I said, sister, stop, where are you going? She said, I want to pray with those soldiers. Because she could sense, I mean, she just had this unbelievable instinct. I said, sister, I'm not so sure that's a good idea, really. So maybe why don't you do this? Maybe why don't you let me take you over here, mess hall, headquarters, motor pool. I'll show you around. She said, nope, I'm going right over there. I said, okay, here we go. So over she goes. She walks right into the middle of, there's 8 of them playing. She walks right in the middle and stands on the free throw line. And they didn't look at her. They looked at me with hatred in their eyes. And I said, okay, men, this is Sister Mary Cecilia. She's from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She's here to pray with you today. It is Sunday, after all. You are welcome to do so. We don't obviously force you to do that, but you have such an opportunity now because she's here with you. And so I'm now going to turn it over to Sister Mary Cecilia. And I turned my back to walk back to get off the court. She was still there, and I was thinking to myself, this can't go well. And by the time I got to the end line and turned around, every one of them, all 8, were like this. And I thought, this is a freaking miracle. I mean, there's no way that should have happened. Anyway, then we took her around and around and around. End of the day, she says, she takes me to I take her to the gate. I said, okay, sister, thanks for coming. She said, I'll be back. I said, I'm sure you will. I said, can I give you a ride back? And she said, yeah, that would be nice this time. I said, okay, I'll go get somebody to get a Jeep and they'll take you back. And she said, no, you're going to drive me back. I thought, good God, this is, I swear to God, this is a true story. Deanie will attest. So we get in the Jeep. Remember I tell you, there's no top on the Jeep, and she's wearing all the stuff. So we're driving down the German Trail. I don't even think I had my license yet. I was only in the country for like 6 months. And all of her stuff is slapping me in the face, as we're driving. We get to the convent, and I stopped and I walked around, to help her out of the Jeep. And she started walking away, and she stopped. And she kind of cocked her head, and she turned around and said, hey, Lieutenant, I wonder if I could ask you a question. I said, of course, sister. I mean, at this point, I'm in the hole and I'm still digging, so I said, go ahead. She said, when we got to when you let me in, you didn't want me to go talk to those 8 soldiers on the basketball court. I said, that's right, sister, I didn't. She said, why not? I said, they were really pretty rough characters, and I thought, they might have been a little bit, kind of unkind to you. And she said, well, okay, but, you haven't lost faith in them somehow, have you? And I said, oh, no, sister. Now, meanwhile, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, pretty much. No, really. And she said, yeah, you haven't lost faith in them, right? I said, oh, no, sister, I didn't do that. She said, well, that's good, because they're your soldiers, right? I said, well, yeah, they're mine. All 50 of them are. She said, yeah, but those 10, those are yours too, right? I said, yeah. And she said, well, that's good you haven't given up on them, because you should never give up on people. And I thought to myself, I'm almost emotional about it, because I thought to myself, in the moment, I went to 4 years at West Point, and it took a nun in a German forest to really teach me what leadership was. And leadership is, if somebody is counting on you for leadership, if somebody thinks enough to put their well-being in your hands, you can't give up on them. They might give up on you. And by the way, of those, I'll tell you the end of the story. Those 8 soldiers, so I drove back to the camp, this was running through my head about, oh my God, maybe I have given up on them. And I got back there, parked the Jeep, they were still playing basketball. I walked over there and took off my uniform shirt, and I walked out and I said, hey, can I get in the game? And from that point on, I started to turn them a bit. And so of the 8, I probably saved 3. The others were maybe too far gone, drug offenses, real misconduct, assault, trafficking of drugs. They were just, they had opted out themselves. But I saved 3. 20 years later, I'm changing command. I'm a full colonel now at Fort Carson, Colorado. And the tradition is you have a reception line, a receiving line when you're leaving, and everybody tells you what a wonderful job you did. And anyway, so I'm standing in line with Deanie, and this big, tall drink of water comes through. He's a master sergeant, which is the 2nd highest rank for our enlisted soldiers. And he leans back and he said, sir, you don't remember me, do you? And I said, I do. It was Greg Vincent. He was one of those kids. So I'm telling you, if you don't remember anything else today other than the little nun, what you have to remember is that if someone counts on you for leadership, you have to deliver it. You have to deliver it. It's not an option, or you're not a leader. I tell those who were junior to me, younger 1 stars and 2 stars and 3 stars, if you're wondering about whether you're a good leader or not, don't look at your statistics. Don't look at the number of how successful you are in the gunnery range or in the motor pool with your maintenance stats, or that's not it. If those who follow you want to be like you, you're a leader. If they don't want to be like you, I don't care how good you are. You may get the job done. You may keep getting promoted, but you're not a leader. Okay, so what do I want you to do now? Because Leah told me I had to give you something to do. And then I'm going to come back on for a few more minutes at the end, and if we have time, I'll take a few questions. I'd like you to do as tables is if you can briefly talk to each other about an example where you've seen an example of a leader who made people feel like they really belong. I mean, really belong. Not just I'm saying you belong, but I'm manifesting it. And an example of where you didn't see it. And then as a table, I'm going to call on, I can't call on all the tables, but I'm going to call on you to give me one good example. I might call on a table and say, give me your good example. I might call on another table and say, give me your bad example. And I'm going to give you about 10 minutes. So go to work. Okay, if I could have your attention again. So the challenge that I gave you was to give me an example of something that you've experienced or you've seen or someone else has told you. I don't want to make it too personal on you, but where you've seen a real positive example of someone, a leader, who really made the people around them feel like they belonged. Okay, how about this table on the positive example?
Hi. I can't. Is it on? Yo,
it is.
It's on. Hi. I'm Bruce Browner. I'm a retired orthopedic trauma surgeon who was adjunct professor here at Duke.
Isn't that redundant? I mean, orthopedic trauma. I mean,
no, there are orthopedic total joint surgeons,
okay.
hand surgeons, like the people that worked on you.
Yeah.
They're total joint surgeons.
It's all trauma.
About 25 subspecialties. Anyway, sports medicine, Dr. Feagin.
Right.
Yeah. So the story I have is not so much about somebody you want to follow, but somebody who had a really important message. As an orthopedic trauma surgeon, I've been interested in road safety, et cetera. So I encountered a very humble private practice orthopedist from upstate New York named John States. And he's notable because he persisted in his effort to get seatbelt legislation in New York, and ultimately found a receptive legislator and is responsible for not only the seatbelt legislation in New York, but having it spread all across the country. We honored him, making him one of the first honorary members of the Orthopedic Trauma Association. I asked him, how did you do this?
Yeah.
He was a car enthusiast, and he said, persistence is the key. I think Jay made that point earlier during his talk. And he said, it took me 25 years continuously pursuing this until I finally found a receptive legislator to push this through.
Yeah.
And I think that's an amazing, important.
Thank you. One of the things that I try to tell leaders, and remember, you're all leaders, is that leaders have a responsibility not only to make the people around them feel like they belong, but leaders are sense makers. And by the way, remember I mentioned the cacophony of information that kind of washes over us. I think our responsibility to make sense of things for those around us as leaders is growing, not shrinking. And so, that gentleman had a chance to make sense of things over time, admittedly, but he stuck with it. Okay, how about a bad example?
I think we came up with a hypothetical,
somebody
that potentially you're working with as a medical student or a resident, an attending physician, that somebody in the team comes up with a suggestion or idea and they get shot down.
Yeah.
And I think the whole team kind of feels like I'm not sure that I'm welcome here or
Yeah.
valued here.
No, that's a perfect example. You know, there's a cliche in the business world in terms of leadership, which is when the chairman of the board sits at the head of the table and starts the meeting by saying, "I think," everybody else stops thinking, because once the leader kind of has his or her cards on the table, it's a little challenging. I mean, you can still pull it off, but the leader ought to be the one who's absorbing. Hey, look, and I come out of the military community where if you were to say to young soldiers, how many generals do you know that are good listeners, they'd be hard pressed for an answer. Because generally, generals are in the giving instruction mode and normally try to persuade ourselves that we're too busy to do anything else. You just got to get it out there and get it done. But truthfully, if you take time to listen, first of all, you'll learn, and second of all, you'll develop a sense of ownership. And that ownership is another one of those synonyms for belonging, right? So I think that's great. I made it a habit as the chairman to always remember that when I had a young lieutenant colonel, I mean, they were young to me, but a young lieutenant colonel that would come in to brief me. First of all, my XO was in the outer office telling that young lieutenant colonel, you got 90 seconds. You get in there and you get the briefing done and you get the hell out of the old man's office, because he's busy. And so, the lieutenant colonel is completely flummoxed, and he comes in and he sits down and he starts talking like really fast and flipping PowerPoint slides, which I love, by the way. Anyway, and I say, whoa, who are you? And he'd say, well, what do you mean, sir? I said, who are you? I mean, you just came in here and started talking at me. Who are you? It's not like the Who are you, that song. But I said, look, I want to know who's briefing me. Who are you? Are you married? How long you been here? Where do you live? And in Washington, you can always get anybody to talk about their commute. How's your commute? Right? Washington, D.C. How's your commute? Oh, it's awful, sir. It takes me 45 minutes to get out the gate. But anyway, it's that being real, being personal, right? Okay, let's go way in the corner for another good example. Okay, I'll come back to you. You have a good one or a bad one? Okay. We're going to go back to back good then.
Hey, I'm Ryan Wingrove. So one of the good examples I have, I was lucky to play college football. My senior year at Bowling Green State University was Coach Urban Meyer's first year as a head coach. So we had gone from awful every year before that. So my first 4 years there, we did not have a winning season. And he came in and pretty much told us from the get-go that things were going to change or we would not be there. And it sounds intense, but at the same time, he had to get the people that didn't want to buy in out. And when we got those guys out, the ability for him to rally us around each other and become a team was amazing. By the time we hit our first game senior year, we went to Missouri, and again, we were 2-9 the year before. We go to Missouri and we beat Missouri at Missouri, first game of the season. If you'd have told that same team that we could have done that before, we would never have believed it with the old leadership. But with his ability to get us to all buy in as a team, the whole motto that we had was, why not us, why not now, and trust. Trust was the thing that he preached every day. And if you trust each other, you can do a lot of amazing things. Yeah. He was a great example.
No, that's a good example. And by the way, sports coaches that's their livelihood, right? And their team turns over so rapidly. Actually, though, think about that. It used to be that sports teams turned over more rapidly than corporate teams. But now the statistic is that young men and women in this country will generally have 4 jobs by the time they're 35 years old. That's a fact. Are there facts anymore, by the way? I think it's true. I think it's a fact. But I think we're all in that business now, that business of kind of constantly remaking your team because of the turnover that we experience. You're going to have a decent coach in here tomorrow. I forget his name. It's some Polish. What's it? I can't even pronounce it, but he'll be here tomorrow, and I think you'll learn something from him maybe. Okay, you had a good one. And then I'm coming over, Eric, good or bad?
Good, yeah.
Okay, we'll come over there. Nobody likes bad examples anyway. Go ahead.
As you were mentioning about great leaders making people feel like they belong, someone who came to mind for me, and I think multiple other people in this room, was Dr. Bill Hardiker, who was our program director for 40 years in Duke Orthopedics and really created a culture of belonging. When you showed up for your interview day, he knew more about you than you knew about yourself, and he really made Duke Orthopedics a place where you felt like you belonged. You felt like somebody knew your name and somebody cared about you. And I think that that's the best example of leadership that I've ever been exposed to.
Can you unpack that a little more though? How did he make you feel that way? I mean, did he spend time with you? Did he listen to you? Did he sing Irish songs? I mean, what did he do?
I think a lot of those things. I think that he was really present. He did not sing Irish songs for me anyway. I don't know about other people. But he was really present with you.
Yeah.
He listened to your concerns about the residency. He listened to your concerns about your personal life. And he really provided, excellent mentorship and support and learning, through this really difficult period of residency.
Yeah, that's great. Glad to hear that. Okay, Eric, your table.
Okay, that'll be me. My name's John Dietz. I'm an orthopedic surgeon in Indianapolis. If you like good stories about Dr. Feagin, this will be one. I was a cadet at West Point in the late 70s, and as a senior cadet, I had a position that required me to serve on a healthcare community committee. I was the adjutant, and that was an additional duty as required. And my first meeting, I went to, Dr. Feagin, as the hospital commander, was conducting the meeting in a very small room, which was very thickly packed with very unhappy people. There were representatives of dependents and some of the outside community, and there were people that had genuine concerns about what was happening at the hospital. But they didn't really, they were vocal about it. What occurred over the next hour was Colonel Feagin did an amazing job of managing these people. Every single person that came there with a deep concern or an issue left the room feeling like their concern had been addressed. Everybody kind of walked out pretty comfortable. And I didn't have much to say, but after the meeting, I went up to Colonel Feagin and I said, "Sir, I don't know how you learned how to do that. I've been here, it's my 4th year. I have no idea how to do what you just did. Is there any way you can teach me, or like I can take a course or something?" And he said, "John, or Cadet, just come over to my house for dinner on Saturday night." Made me feel involved. At his house for dinner, I met Rob, I met Randall, I met Nancy. I became enamored with their family, and all I wanted to do was be like him. Prior to that, all I wanted to do was be an engineer, build airplanes. That was my only interest.
Yeah.
Going on to the Army. So Colonel Feagin changed my life by directing me toward medicine. And for that, I thank him very greatly.
That's great. If I had any sense, let's give him a round of applause. I don't think anybody's going to top that, and nor should we. I mean, it's, you're wearing the honoree banner there, so we really should make sure we defer to that. So what I want to do now is a couple of other things. One is, just let me tell you that this theme of leadership without authority or influence without authority is exactly the job description of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, really. No, seriously. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, by statute, the way it's written into the law, has no authority to do anything. Nothing. Can't move a canteen from one part of the world to the next. Doesn't have a budget. All that authority resides out of the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the combatant commanders, and the service chiefs, who have all the money. And it's done that way intentionally. So the service chiefs have all the money, and they build the force. The combatant commanders actually execute the strategy out and about around the world. The Secretary of Defense, they work for him, not for the chairman. But the chairman's influence is enormous. Enormous convening authority, enormous ability to, because you're with the Secretary of Defense all the time. You're with the President 3-4 times a week. And so the system has been designed so that the chairman's role is actually to lead with influence, not authority. And so I love the topic. But I'm sure, when you come right down to it, here's the other way of thinking about this. It's, even if you have the authority, it's far better to have your way inside of an organization by positively influencing it than bludgeoning it to follow you. Because generally speaking, if you have to bludgeon an organization to have it follow you, there's no ownership. There's no learning, and I think the best organizations are learning organizations. And then because there's no ownership and no learning, you're going to probably come up with suboptimal solutions that are too expensive, and when that happens, they don't last. And so you'll be right back at it, one congressional cycle later, if you get my drift. And so I want to say one last thing. By the way, I'm not done because I have a couple of slides I want to show you. So one of the things I wanted to leave you with, we started out by talking about how important it is to develop a sense of belonging and what kind of persona you should aspire to have as a leader. Good listener, sense maker, all those things. Then we talked about some positive and negative examples that I think there were some commonalities you could draw from those. Now what I want to do is kind of show you the way I thought about myself as a leader. Now whether anybody else thought about me that way, history will be the judge. But this is the way I thought of myself as a leader, and particularly when I became the chairman, and tried to always have this kind of these three touchstones in my life. Put the first slide up, please. Oh, there you are. That handsome devil is me at 4 years of age, 1956. That's my grandmother, Grandma Bridget. Grandma Bridget came to this country from Ireland at 16 years of age. None of the rest of her family came. The typical Irish family, farmer parents, 5 kids. This one decides to come to America because where she sat in the pecking order, she knew that there wasn't going to be much left for her to do either on the farm or elsewhere in County Mayo of Ireland. So she decides to come over and join some other Irish relatives and make her own way at 16. I joke with Mike Krzyzewski. Oh, I can pronounce that name. I joke with Mike though, because Mike used to tell the story. I hope he doesn't tell it tomorrow, but if he does, don't bust me out. About his grandparents coming through Ellis Island, and the grandfather talking to a buddy walking through, waiting in line to come up to the counter and sign in. And as Mike tells the story, he can just imagine that his grandfather turned to his buddy and said, my grandson's going to be the most successful basketball coach in the history of the United States Division I basketball. So now when I tell the story, I tell it like this. So behind those 2 Polish guys was my grandmother. And she doesn't speak a word of Polish. So she was kind of annoyed about the whole thing and eventually tapped one of them on the shoulder and said, pardon me, I don't want to be rude, but could you share with me what you're feeling and thinking and talking about right now? And so they said, yeah, we're just talking about the fact that our grandson's going to be a really successful college basketball coach someday. And my grandmother said to them, well, that's nothing. My grandson's going to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So Mike and I... The reason I have that up there is that's my image of my grandmother. She really raised me. My parents were blue-collar workers. They both went to work every day. She somehow owned the house. I don't know. She might have been running numbers or something for all I know. But she owned the house, and they would go to work and tap me on the bottom, and I'd climb up the stairs and spend the day with Grandma Bridget, and who taught me that I was Irish first, Catholic second, and American third. But we got around to the American part, and she was very excited when I went to West Point, and she was with me when I graduated from West Point. But here's why she's such an iconic figure in my life. I think that one of the ways that a good leader should carry himself or herself is with an immigrant's spirit. Immigrant spirit. An immigrant, what I came to know when I was fortunate enough to meet her and the other immigrants that she surrounded herself with, and then through the years, is they have an indomitable spirit. You can't beat them down. You cannot beat. They never have a bad day. I mean, they might have a bad hour or two, but they, generally speaking, they're so thankful for what they have that they have this indomitable spirit. And I think that first of all, we're all immigrants, by the way. I mean, unless there's a Native American in the audience, which God bless you. But most of the time when I ask that question, it's just all of us immigrants, at varying degrees of separation from the old country. But, we all had that experience in our background. And I try to bring it forward, not because I'm nostalgic about being Irish, but I'm nostalgic about the spirit that brought my grandmother to this country, and I don't want to lose it. And I pass the same thing on to my kids. I want them to have an immigrant's spirit. Okay, go to the next slide, if you would. This is a Marine, and I apologize to those of you in the Army that I didn't bring an Army picture, or if you're a sailor, I didn't bring a sailor picture. This guy's name is Paul Eisen, 1st Marine Division, 1945, Okinawa, running across the Valley of Death. Now, you don't get a name like Valley of Death unless there's something really bad going on in that neighborhood. And so he's an ammo bearer, which means that he's bringing ammunition from behind the lines to the forward lines to feed a mortar carrier or a machine gunner. I can't tell for sure. What I love about the picture, though, first of all, I love the picture because it's taken by a combat photographer who's hiding in a shell crater. I mean, that's what's happening here. The photographer's in a crater because it's so damn dangerous. If you stick your head up, you're going to lose it. And so the photographer's taking this picture of this guy running back and forth, because I also want you to know that although most people didn't make it across the valley once, he made it across the valley 3 times, carrying ammunition for his fellow Marines. Who said the word trust before? You don't climb out of that foxhole unless you're confident that the man or woman to your left or right, that your leadership, that the medic, that the chaplain, that the helicopter pilot that'll medevac you, unless you have absolute confidence that they are going to be there for you, that they know their job, they know you know their job, and that together you're a team and you care for each other. That's what makes the military tick, by the way. Now, we have, it's a little easier for us to develop that because of the stakes. The stakes are a lot higher. They're life and death. But by the way, you live in a life and death world as well, don't you? The other thing I like about this picture is you can see the contradictions of combat. You've got, first of all, courage is there. I mean, you wouldn't be running across the Valley of Death, to bring ammunition to your buddies unless you had a certain amount of courage. But also fear. You can see the whites of his eyes. You know that phrase, don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes? That's because in those kind of environments, that's all you see is the whites of their eyes. If you watch the way he's holding his carbine, his hand is so tense that it looks like he's going to squeeze it in half. He's leaned forward in a sprinter's posture. So you got this whole courage and fear thing, manifest in that picture. He survived, by the way. He died in 2003, and having lived a ripe old age after coming out of the Valley of Death. But I love the picture because what it says about trust, what it says about courage, and what I use this for is to remind myself, well, first of all, I use this to ask myself a question and to remind myself of the answer. The question is, why would anybody jump out of a perfectly good foxhole and run across the Valley of Death for me? Because Marty Dempsey says, take that hill. Why would they do that? I mean, why would anyone put themselves at the risk of their life because I told them to do something? And the answer for me was because I had to develop in those that I led that trust that will allow them to do that with confidence, trust and confidence. And so in this one, the answer for me was that I had to live my life as a leader with a warrior's heart. So immigrant spirit, warrior's heart. They had to know that I had the same instincts as they did. And even if I got so far removed from them in rank, this was a private, I was a 4-star general. And it gets harder, by the way, to make sure that those around you know that you're not so disconnected from the most junior person in the organization. So immigrant spirit, warrior's heart. Immigrant spirit, warrior's heart. Next one. So that's actually my official photo as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. What I find interesting about it was that it was taken, I didn't know it was being taken. It was taken as I stood in the King David Hotel in Jerusalem. Anybody ever been in the King David Hotel? You can look out the back window of the King David Hotel, and without moving your head, you don't have to move your head, you can see the entire old city. The most contested piece of real estate on the face of the earth, the intersection of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And it's been violently contested throughout history. And it was such an overwhelming, moment for me to look out there. First of all, I was in Israel to try to help move the process along toward a two-state solution, to try to help the Israeli Defense Forces come to grips with security if they did agree to a two-state solution. And it was almost overwhelming, actually, to think, how this has been going on for millennia, for 5,000 years. How am I going to make any difference in this thing? And what I remembered was it wasn't actually whether I succeeded or failed. It was whether I gave it the kind of effort it deserved. And that reminds me, and I hope would remind you, that leaders have to lead with a servant's soul. It's not about you, it's about those you lead. And in this case, it wasn't about me and whether I actually happened to be the chairman when peace breaks out in the Middle East. It's my time to try to make a difference. And I'll do that with a servant's soul. Because if you do it with ego, you're going to get pulled and tugged in different directions. But if you do it with a servant's soul, the outcome almost doesn't matter. You know what I mean? I mean, it sounds odd to say that, but what a leader should be in the business of doing is the best they can do. And by the way, over an extended period of time. Somebody talked about persistence before as well. So there's the three, my three touchstones when I was chairman were, am I acting, because you do have bad days. I kidded about you never have a bad day. You have bad days, but you can't let that manifest itself for those around you. I mean, look, when you're a four-star general and a lieutenant colonel sees you having a bad day, if they do see you having a bad day, the lieutenant colonel thinks, wait a minute, this is the four-star general. How can he be having a bad day? And if he's having a bad day, my day must be worse, and I just don't realize it yet. So, that indomitable spirit of immigrant spirit that allows you to just move, just move and not drag everyone down around you, even when you're having a bad day. And then the second one, of course, the warrior's heart. That's pretty obvious. And then this one, the touchstone of a servant's soul. The best leaders I've ever worked for understood that leadership was a privilege, not an entitlement. It ain't about the uniform. It's not about the medals. It's not about the really cool parking place. And, it's not about getting driven around. It's not about, whatever it happens to be. It's you're a leader and and you accept the responsibility to lead with a servant's soul. Okay, just turn the slides off. So I promised myself, if not you, that I would leave 10 minutes for questions, and guess how much time we have. This is how you get to be the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. So I'll be happy to take questions about anything. I mean, anything we talked about, the world as we see it. I mean, there's plenty to talk about these days. I'm not going back to Yanni and Laurel, though. Yeah.
Uh-huh. 86, and I'm an OBGYN. My question for you is, you talked about the disconnect between those on the general and the private, and somehow getting the private to know that you care, understand, have that same warrior's heart. Give us some tips.
Well, I mean, there was a management book. And by the way, I try to make a distinction between management and leadership. I think there's plenty of books written about management, which is really processes and systems, and there's not enough written about leadership. And I think the world that we have now started to see clarifying itself for us is one that requires more leadership. But in that management book I mentioned, that talked about management by walking around, right? I mean, you got to be visible. You've heard the old thing about, deeds, not words. If a leader is constantly saying something but doing something else, it's just it'll be crystal clear. And by the way, once you lose their faith and you lose their confidence, it's hard to get it back. So, I mean, one of the things I worry about in our profession is that with the proliferation of social media, the proliferation of information management, information technologies, there are some leaders out there who communicate almost exclusively, in used to be 120 characters, now I guess it's 140, now it's 280. And you know, that is effective to a point, but what I think what followers really want to see is you. They want to know who you are. And so you got to be visible, and you got to be present, and oftentimes you got to be where they're going through the toughest times. You know, we say that a good leader in the military shares the discomfort and danger of those he leads or she leads. And so I would just suggest that the most obvious bit of advice is, you know, don't stay behind your desk. I used to impose on my staff, insist that they put white space on my calendar. And what do I mean by that? Well, hell, many of you know, I mean, if you're a senior leader and someone else is in control of scheduling you, they're going to overschedule you. It's just, you know, and when you question it, they're going to make a pretty compelling case that you really should have that additional meeting and that other trip, that it really should be on your calendar. But you as the leader, I think, always have the ability to say, I got it, but this one doesn't feel right. I'll give you an example. When I became chairman, we had this elaborate transition team. I think it was like 25 people that got together and tried to help shape my next 4 years. And then they come in to brief you just before you become chairman. And they had, I think they had 12 4-inch 3-ring binders, and they flop them on your table. And there it is. Just do that. You're going to be a great goddamn chairman. You know, do that. And so I said, okay, look, I'm a little overwhelmed. So how about we start by looking at a calendar? What have you? Because I asked them to plan my first 6 months. So they showed me the calendar, and it had me going to Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, South Korea, Australia, Japan, and Brussels, England, France, and Germany in the first 6 months. And they were all excited about this. You know, they said, this is great, sir. You're going to touch our most important allies. You're going to touch, and Iraq and Afghanistan. And you're going to touch all this stuff, and it's going to be great. You know, you're going to make a huge impression on them. And I said, that's actually really well said. But I said, who else am I supposed to be making an impression on around here? And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, I mean, who do I work for? And they said, well, sir, the president. And I said, yeah, well, look at the calendar. I mean, how do you expect me to make an impression on the president if I'm traveling, you know, for the first 6 months? I mean, it was almost wall to wall. And they said, what do you mean, sir? I said, I'm not going anyplace. I said, I'm sorry you wasted your time. But I said, take that calendar and move it 6 months to the right, and maybe I'll do some of that. But I said, President Obama doesn't know me from anybody else, and I've got to make myself valuable to him if I'm going to actually be effective as the chairman. So I'm going to every meeting, as hideous as that could be. I'm going to every meeting. I'm going to be part of every video teleconference. I'm going to go over and see him every Tuesday after. It's because you get time with the president. We had every Tuesday afternoon, SecDef and I. But the caveat is if you're in town. Well, if you're not in town, you're not going to get the time. If you don't get the time, you don't get to know him. So I stayed at home for 6 months, roughly. I had a couple of mandatory trips to NATO, but it's back to the point. You, the leader, have to decide what's important and then impose that on your staff. Don't let the opposite occur. What else? Yes, ma'am. And by the way, balancing your personal and professional life. So, you know, one last thing, because I love this. When we promote somebody in the military, I'm sure there's an analogy here in the medical field. When we promote you, we give you two things: a nice new shiny rank to wear on your uniform, and we give you a rock. And on the rock, we paint the word guilt. And then we tell you to put on a rucksack, and we drop the rock in your rucksack, and then you walk around with it for the next 3 or 4 years until you make the next rank, where we give you a bigger rock with guilt. And you know where I'm heading with this. How many times have you heard, I can't possibly go on vacation? This place will fold up without me. How can this place, how the hell is the world going to continue to be safe if I'm on vacation? That's not possible. Well, guess what? It actually turns out that, oddly enough, the world does continue to turn. Things continue to get done. The people who work for you love filling in your absence. Your family, starts to think maybe they do care. Maybe there is, maybe we have a future together. So you got to balance that personal and professional. And no, by the way, nobody else can do it but you. I can't tell you. I go to West Point. I go to Annapolis. I go to the Air Force Academy. Sir, can you tell us how to balance our lives? No. And then they laugh and they say, no, really, sir, that's my question. I said, I answered it. No, I can't tell you how to balance your life. You balance your life. I'm not going to tell you to go to a PTA meeting or go coach youth soccer. But if I call up and I'm looking for you and somebody tells me you're coaching youth soccer, I'm happy with that. But I'm not going to tell you to do it. So, ma'am.
Hello, my name's Aviana Baldwin, current medical student and Feagin scholar.
Oh.
And you spoke in the beginning about, this disconnect and how we talk a lot about things that separate us. And then throughout your presentation, I heard you mentioning things like Twitter and Waze, and you seem very connected in what I would say people say what is causing a disconnect is this generational gap with millennials and
Yeah.
technology. And I guess how have you been able to bridge that gap and suggest a meeting in the middle that accepts that technology is a big part of my generation, but still respecting and understanding the values of other generations as well? That makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And, I'm a digital immigrant in the spirit of immigrant spirit. You're a digital native. I mean, that's how we define ourselves, right? So I think what I would suggest to you is that the information technology it's wonderful. I'm all for it. I actually use it. I used to do Faceball. What the hell is Faceball? I told you I knew what I was talking about. I used to do Facebook town hall meetings, actually, which were fascinating. And I'm still very active in Twitter on the topic of leadership. So I tweet frequently about leadership. If I see something about leadership, or even if I just dream it up, I'll toss it out there and encourage people to react to it. And but that's talking about leadership. And the distinction I want to make for you is these information technologies are great mediums to talk about leadership, but it's not leadership. Leadership is personal. And so, you might send a message out to your workforce through, social media. In fact, hell, teachers send out assignments now on social media to their classes. But when it comes down to actually teaching it and leading, that's a personal enterprise. And so you can send things out on social media that kind of enable or set the table for something you want to get done. But then you got to put the iPhone down and go out and interact with the people who are going to do it. So I use social media a lot, but I never use it in lieu of my charming personality. Yeah.
I have one. Joe Calandra from Charleston. I would like to hear your comments. In the old days, we talked about balance, staying physically fit, doing exercise, being with your family. Dr. Burke mentioned some Eastern kind of medicine, the new sort of life balance, self-care, meditation, being present in the moment. My experience with great leaders, and I've had some here, is that they're present with you. When you're speaking with them, they're looking at you and they're listening. And so I wanted to ask you what your thoughts of that and about meditation. Are you doing that? Do you do it personally? Because I have a godson who's in the military and he's pretty high up there, and he started that kind of self-care balance.
Yeah. Well, I normally ask my wife what I should be thinking about. No, interestingly enough, when I was the chief staff of the Army, we were having all kinds of, and Eric, you'll remember, Eric Schumacher was the Surgeon General of the Army, and we were confronting a medical community that was both of them were arguing, one of three different directions: medication, meditation, Pilates, I can't remember, but we were besieged with ideas about how best to treat things like post-traumatic stress disorder. The conclusion I came to, by the way, was that there is no one-size-fits-all. And so I'm completely open-minded to the kind of let's say, non-traditional medical approaches so long as there's a way to, a metric that can actually help us understand whether we are doing the good we think we're doing. Because truthfully, I think you'd agree, Eric, we did some harm in the early days with things like TBI and PTSD because we over-medicated. And we're really still trying to catch up in many cases from that. So I wish I could give you a more articulate answer, but I'm not as read into things. And as far as do I meditate, I don't even know how to answer that question. I pray, you know what I mean? I mean, if I'm out for a good brisk walk, or I'm letting my physical therapist try to get one more degree of flexion out of my knee that Doc Feagin ruined, 40 years ago. That's a form of meditation, and I've used words in that setting, which I don't know if I should repeat. But no, I mean, honestly, I think all of those things, it's really, doesn't it just come down to what, especially those non-traditional forms of medicine, if it works, it works. But I think we got to have the ability to know and not, continue to invest in things that are only marginally successful. But I defer to you all as the experts in that. But I'm open-minded to almost anything, frankly. What else? Yes.
Thank you for sharing your experiences, sir. My name is Marianne Nolan. I'm a coach from New York. How do you cope with the dark night of the soul? You lose a patient. You make a wrong decision that costs people their lives.
Yeah.
There's things that happen that are not within your span of control, yet you have to take responsibility for them. You feel very alone. I'm sure there have been moments like that in your time in your career.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there'll be for everybody else in this room if there haven't been already.
Yeah.
How do you cope with that?
No, that's a great question. I was telling the small group at my table here that there was a moment in 2003, I was in Baghdad, had about 32,000 soldiers, and in the early days of Baghdad, you may not remember this, but it wasn't so much danger as it was chaos. The country basically collapsed. But in that chaos grew an insurgency, and then the insurgency decided to attack both the government that was forming and us because we were supporting it. And we started taking casualties is really where I was heading with this. And so as you start taking casualties, the weight, it just gets heavier and heavier on you. And you know that in the military, as sort of a cathartic experience, we do memorial services, and they're very public and meaning for the organization, they're very public and transparent, and we would generally, for example, you've seen pictures where you would put a Foot Locker on a small platform, an inverted rifle, a pair of boots, a helmet, dog tags, and then you'd have the soldiers who had lost their teammate. We generally went out in groups of 12. So I mentioned I had 32,000 soldiers. That's a lot of groups of 12. So they were all over the place. And when one of them took a casualty, I would try to go to the memorial service. So that's one way that I, made sure that I stayed connected. I'll tell you another in a moment. Anyway, at these services, the chaplain speaks, the captain speaks, their most immediate leader speaks, and then 2 or 3 of the teammates speak. And it's heart-wrenching, and it's inspirational. Because these kids, and they are kids, they've got this unimaginable conflict of emotions. They're fearful because they got to go back out. They're guilty because they lost their teammate, and they wonder, how did I let that happen? And but they're also courageous, because they know that it's their job. And so I always found those events for me, I took more away from those events than I gave by my presence there. But here's the one interesting thing that happened to me. The first couple of ceremonies, I would walk up to, well, at the end of the ceremony, the expectation was the senior leader would go through and shake the hand of the surviving teammates. So now let's say 11 young soldiers in a row. And you'd shake their hand, and you want to find something to say to them, right? But what do you say to somebody who's just lost their teammate? And so I just didn't have the words. And by the way, as an Irish English professor, you're almost never without words, but I couldn't find them. Until one night, you ever in that period between asleep and awake, where you're kind of half awake and you have this idea. Why do you have it then, by the way? Because there's white space, because your mind isn't cluttered yet. But I had this phrase that was echoing in my head, and it was make it matter, make it matter, make it matter. And I thought, wow, I should get up and write that down because I'm going to forget it, which often happens, right? And so it didn't, but it didn't. I woke up and it was still there, and I thought, I wonder what that's all about, make it matter. So the next memorial service, I walked over to do the same thing I'd always done, which is to say something to the first and second and third and fourth in line. And without even thinking about it, I said, make it matter. And, the kid's eyes lit up. And because he knew exactly what I was saying to him, him or her, which is, we can't undo that. But you can make it matter. And so and by the way, so I actually, you asked how I cope with those kinds of responsibilities. I think that the way I cope with them is by resolving to make it matter. If someone was lost under my command, then I want to make sure that as I live my life, in big ways and in small ways, that I make it matter. That I don't let that have been in vain. But that's not unique to the military. I'm telling you. I think, kind of resolving to make your life matter. Again, small way, most times in small ways, really. Something you do for your child that you just know is right, or send a note to a grieving coworker. Those are the small ways you make things matter. And then every once in a while you'll get a chance to do something big, like really like Dr. Feagin and a leadership forum. And in my case, I got to be chairman, and we did some pretty important things with diversity and allowing women to serve in roles beyond which they could ever serve before, which I was really proud of because it felt like I was making that matter for those young women who had been killed under my command. I also so I lost 132 young men and women in those years between 3 and 4, and I had a little card laminated with the picture of each of them, and on the back is something about them and their family. And I used to carry them around until they became too cumbersome to carry. So now I only carry 2. I always have 2 with me, and I rotate them around. And the rest of them are on my desk. They were on my desk as chief. They were on my desk as chairman. They're on my desk right now at home in retirement. And there's 130 cards on that desk, and in a little mahogany walnut cigar box, and engraved on the top of the box is "Make It Matter." And so every day when I go to my computer, I see this box, which reminds me, let's figure out today something that will allow you to say you made it matter. And I think that's good advice for anybody, actually. Okay, I think I've run out my shot clock. Yes, sir.
I'm speaking for all of us when I say, I'm speaking for all of us when I say you have to have walked the walk to give a lecture as you have, the motivation and the inspiration, and that was fantastic.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay.
Sir, I think one of our Feagin scholars, Tony Fuller, has something for you.
Thank you very much. Can you tell me what's here? I have no idea. You don't? You're a great audience, and thanks for being here to spend some time. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
You want to introduce?
All right, so thank you very much, General Dempsey. As I said earlier today, what a mix of ideas, inspiration, learning from all of these different realms. And we started our day with one of the scholars' presentations, and we get to end our day with a second presentation from one of our scholar groups. So I'd like to invite up group 3. And, you know, so I mentioned earlier that each of these groups got some form of inspiration, a charge, as it were, right, for what they should explore and dig into. This group, and Joe let me know that it was Kathy and Dulcic who was here at one point, who came up with this idea about how can we, the ED seems like it could be a better place. What might be some ways that we could improve the emergency department in some way, right? That's narrow. Go to it, team 3.
All right, good afternoon. Thanks for having us. We're very excited to be here. It's going to be hard to top the wonderful talks that we've had so far, so hopefully you find this interesting. We are, as she said, Team 3, and the title of our project was Increase in Efficiency of Emergency Department Interpreter Services. This is a picture of our group, and just as an aside, this was a picture taken at one of the early events that actually our previous cohort of teams showed with their wonderful, I think it was a tuna log or a chicken log, I'm not quite sure it was, but it was a canoe nonetheless. But this was one of our favorite projects that we did, where we got to cook meals for each other, and it was a great team building exercises. We didn't unfortunately make any chicken logs. We had a bit more of a refined palate, and we had actually made dark chocolate cherry truffles, which were reportedly excellent. But I wanted to put a plug in for that project, which we all really enjoyed. But here's our team. It consists of myself. I'm Nathan Graham, one of the fourth-year orthopedic surgery residents going into sports medicine. We have Ashley Wietzma, who's a Duke urology resident, Angela Pollock is Duke anesthesiology resident, and we were fortunate enough to get 3 of the best Duke medical students. Christina Quao, who actually is not able to make it tonight, and then we have Aman Kansal and Anthony Lin. And then we couldn't have done it without our fearless team leader that held our feet to the fire throughout this whole process and was just a wonderful, wonderful teacher and team coach, and that's Bill Morley. So before we start, I just want to mention that, as Leah said, they gave us these prompts of how to start with developing an idea, and they were extremely vague, which was frustrating at first, but I think what we learned was they're vague on purpose to make us kind of dig deep and kind of really come up with a challenging project throughout this challenging process of coming up with this idea. So what I'd like to do with this talk is we're first just going to focus on what that project was about, kind of how we derived our purpose for that project, and then talk about the methodology of it and treat it kind of like a scientific paper. And then after that, we're going to kind of convert into really maybe the more meaningful part of this, and that's, well, what did we learn from that? What leadership skills, what leadership challenges did we face, and how we kind of came together as a team to kind of learn from this and make it very educational for each and every one of us. So I'll start with a little bit of the background. So non-English speaking patients, or what we would call limited English proficiency patients, they play an important role in health disparities. This is a group that has been identified as having a very difficult time navigating the healthcare landscape. And we know in looking at the literature in this population that the limited English proficiency patients report decreased satisfaction in their care. And that's for a number of reasons, and we'll touch on that. But one of the things that we found common across the literature that we reviewed on this population was medical interpreter services, how that is delivered, and specifically looking at our own institution, how it is perhaps underutilized. So if you look at this diagram, this is just a rudimentary diagram to think about conceptually what this cohort of patients actually experiences when they walk into a triage room. The triage nurse comes up to them asking them questions, and at that point they are identified as limited English speaking patients. So at that point, at least in our institution, we use a service called Service Hub, which is kind of the point of contact for notifying an interpreter service that a provider needs to utilize their services for communication to help this population. Once they get through the triage and they've talked to the interpreter, then they're in the emergency department. That physician then has to contact the interpreter. Another layer of communication needs to occur so that they can figure out what they need to do to discuss the care with possibly another consulting service. As all three of us are consultants in our respective fields, another layer occurs where the consulting provider then needs to speak with an interpreter. So you can see already that it becomes very layered for this population and can become very confusing. And in fact, this quote here is from one of the emergency medicine charge nurses who, when we had an interview with her and we said, well, how are things looking from your standpoint? She said, the system is fragmented and broken at best. And you know, that may sound like not a flattering thing to say about the system, but what we took it as our team is really an opportunity to take advantage of, well, if it's fragmented and broken, like what can we do to fix it? And so we took that as a challenge. So our project was, how can we improve this process for providers and patients with limited English proficiency? And as we started to develop the ideas of how we would approach this and how we could increase the efficiency of this system and perhaps the communications between the providers and this population, it was important to us to utilize kind of the pillars of what make the Feagin Leadership Program values. And patient-centeredness at the middle, like our last cohort brought up, was what really stood out to us. And we really wanted to focus on those patients that had limited English proficiency and how we could affect their lives. So next, what I'd like to do is have Aman come up and talk a little bit about the data extraction and data analysis that we did to kind of come up with this problem.
Thanks, Nate. So first, I'd like to just go through some of the results that we got through Service Hub, which again is a point of contact between providers and the interpreter services. This was meant as pretty much a data exploration on our end. As I think the group before alluded to, it's important to actually know the topic and to really invest yourself in researching this so you can actually identify the problem points. So first, just looking at the data very quickly, we got data from August to December of 2017, saw that there were about 2,800 interpreter service requests made during those 5 months. Digging deeper into the data, we saw that this was about 10 unique patients per day. We saw that by and large, far and away, Spanish is the language that most people put in a request for, followed by Arabic, French, and sign language. Just to give a few definitions, response time over here refers to when the request was put in to when an interpreter actually came. The service time refers to how long the entire interpreter encounter actually took. And arrival to complete time refers to when the patient was bedded in the ED to when the entire encounter was actually complete. This first graph looks at basically how the number of requests change as a function of the hour of the day. We can see a couple things over here. First, the peak load time is really between 2 and 5 p.m. And also what we can see is that the point of the day when there's the least load is between maybe 3 to 4, 3 to 5 a.m. This was interesting to us because we don't really see a change in the amount of, in the supply of interpreters during these times. We see no change depending on how really the hours of the day fluctuate. And I think that there's a good argument to be made that this is a point of improvement. Next, we looked at peak load units. A couple interesting things to see here. First, there is a huge spike in pediatrics. And what we actually realized was that this is most likely due to the fact that a lot of these encounters that happen in pediatrics, oftentimes the interpreter services are called because not the patient, but really the parents of the patients are the ones who need these interpreter services. And that's not really recorded in the chart. The second very interesting thing that we saw was that registration, as you can see, is one of the 2 or 3 lowest units that actually request interpreter services. A very interesting point made by actually Bill when we were talking to him was, if this is a workflow issue, why isn't it that everyone who goes to registration has interpreter services already called for them, right? If this is first point of contact. And so we thought that really is interesting, and the data shows right now that this is another huge point of improvement or place for improvement, that if we can actually identify patients that need interpreter services right from the first point of contact, we can maximize efficiency. And finally, we looked at how many orders were actually put in per patient. As you can see, an overwhelming majority had 1 order put in, but this actually goes up to 7. That means there were a handful of patients that actually had interpreter services called 7 times during their hospital stay. Now, that makes sense for a lot of these complex patients, but the fact that there is so much variability also made us wonder that maybe this isn't the most efficient process right now, and that maybe that this is another point or another place for improvement.
After getting a better understanding of how interpretation service patterns kind of went through our entire emergency department, we wanted to get a better understanding of what our provider perception looked like. So we sent out a survey. We sent out a survey to all current residents here at Duke Hospital. It was a 12-point survey, and what it really tried to assess was familiarity with, effectiveness of, and satisfaction with interpretation and services and the pathways to gain access to them, as well as try to identify any opportunities for improvement here at Duke Hospital. We had an overwhelming response rate, 173 responses from 16 different specialties, all residents here within our hospital, ranging from medical, surgical, primary care, and emergency department. Of all our responses, 95% of them said that they had assessed a patient with limited English proficiency in the ED, really indicating to us that this was a problem that was pervasive throughout our hospital system and impacted every level of training as well as every specialty within our hospital. As Aman was talking about earlier, we see about 10 patients with limited English proficiency every day in our emergency department. 50% of the time, the English proficiency status of that patient is not known until the resident consultant provider comes down into the room and begins speaking with them. What that means is that the consultant will come into the room, begin the interview to try to assess the medical problem and the medical need there, and immediately realize that there's a breakdown in communication there, resulting in the resident having to leave the room, go find an interpreter, and try to revisit the patient again at a later time, leading to massive inefficiencies within our hospital system, and overall, just an inferior patient experience here. Even of those 5 patients that we see, 25% of the time, English proficiency status is actually discovered from the patient themselves. Another 25% of the time, it's discovered from the patient chart. This means that of the 10 patients every day that we see with English proficiency needs in order to bridge communication, 7 to 8 of those patients, we are dropping the ball in communication from team to team as we take that patient through their healthcare journey. Even when accessing interpreter services, we did a survey on how current residents identify the pathways to accessing interpreter services here at Duke Hospital. 75% of our responses indicated that residents felt like they had a clear understanding of how to assess interpreter services here. However, the response varied immensely when asked about what was the method to be used. The majority of our responses actually said that they found the ED interpreter and physically grabbed them into the room. And as we talked about earlier, the official protocol here at Duke is actually to personally place a service HUD consult. And what this showed here was that there was no clear consensus among our providers about what we were supposed to accurately do when working up and working with patients of limited English proficiency.
So after we had a chance to kind of analyze this data and probably more importantly talk to the other 173 responses that we had from the different providers and residents, it gave us an opportunity to kind of identify where these gaps in communication were occurring. And in fact, they were occurring at multiple levels, but specifically from the consultant's perspective, when the ED provider would identify that a consultant was needed, whether that's orthopedic surgery, urology, anesthesiology, neurology, what have you, they would put in a consult, as you can see here. And this is what it looks like right now through the Epic interface. And if you're walking around the hospital as a resident carrying one of these bombs, they'll go off and they'll notify you that there is a patient in the emergency department that is requiring your service or your workup. Unfortunately, the way that the system, the interface was set up is you would get a page and it would notify you that a patient needed your help in the emergency department. But what it didn't communicate with the provider is what language that patient speaks. What is their preferred language? What is their primary language? And so a lot of times, the majority of the time, you would go down and see, as Anthony pointed out, you'd see the patient in the emergency department, you'd walk in the room and a big smile on your face and say hi and start talking, and then realize that they don't understand what you're saying. And it was it's embarrassing for that to happen. It shouldn't happen. And so what we did is we said, well, how can we change this? How can we make it so that we know ahead of time, before we walk into that emergency department, that we're going to see a patient who has limited English proficiency, and we're going to have all the staff and all the resources ready before we even enter that room and start discussing their history and the reason why they're there. So we met with the Epic IT folks. We met with what's called the Provider Optimization Council. Getting them together was a challenge, and once they heard our idea and what we wanted to do, they were extremely excited and allowed us to implement a change in the interface, not only just for certain consultants, the consultants that are on our team, but hospital-wide. So they rolled this out. I believe April 17th was the first day of rollout, and so basically, the way it's going to work now going forward is the change that we've made is now any consulting provider that gets a consultation for a workup on a patient that is non-English speaking, you will know that a priori before coming in and seeing that patient. And that'll give you optimal time to utilize the resources that are available to appropriately treat that patient and give them the respect they need by having the interpreter available prior to walking in and introducing yourself.
All right, so you've heard that at the very center of our project was basically improving the quality of care of these limited English proficiency patients. And I think we did a good job and covered a lot of ground. We got a better understanding of the system that serves these patients as far as acquiring translator services by our analysis of Service Hub. We also asked the question, how do we improve the system for providers who are taking care of these patients so that they can provide better care? And that was through the implementation of that button so that the provider was aware that they were about to see a patient who might need translation services before walking in and being surprised by that. But I think the more important question that we didn't touch upon is that we never really got to the patient experience. And I think that would be the most important next step, would be that we would follow someone with limited English proficiency, both from the moment they enter the emergency room to their kind of care throughout the process. Because as you can imagine, there's already a lot of redundancy. They might be telling their medical history over and over again to multiple different providers because there's no real communication between providers. So I think that would be the next major step and the major limitation in our project. All right, so moving on to the lessons learned about leadership. I think it's very appropriate to start with one of the most valuable lessons that we learned, which was self-awareness. And this was also the first session we had as part of our Feagin Leadership Program journey. During the first session, all the Feagin scholars were asked to fill out a DISC questionnaire. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the DISC questionnaire, it's very similar in concept to the Myers-Briggs personality questionnaire. It's a self-reported questionnaire that you answer questions about, and what it does is it categorizes you in 4 different behavioral traits, which are D, I, S, and C, standing for DISC. And what those are dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And the blue dots on this DISC profile is actually the profile of every team member as on our Feagin team. And as you can see, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think for our team, we span the entire DISC.
Just to give you an idea, someone who might be in the D category is very results-oriented, very strong-willed, forceful. Someone who's in the steadiness category, more on the S, is very patient, humble, tactful. And each one of these behavioral traits doesn't necessarily mean you're a better leader, but it just means that you have certain strengths and weaknesses. And what I think we did really well under the guidance of our coach, Bill, was that at the very first meeting, we talked about what we could bring to the project, so our strengths, and what we needed from our team members. And I think we did an excellent job then to delegate the tasks that needed to be done for the project to be successful. But we didn't revisit that until we started working on this project, or this presentation. And when we reflected and actually read through the minutes of that very first meeting, there were so many challenges that I think we could have overcome much more easily had we really reassessed kind of the strengths of every team member and what things that they could bring and what they were comfortable with. So it was an incredibly useful tool to anticipate and address challenges, and I think it kind of reinforces that being self-aware is just one of those key skills to have. The other big challenge that we met from day one was buy-in, and that I know that seems incredibly intuitive, but it was one of our biggest challenges. I think when we originally came up with this idea, we had the buy-in of all the residents in the sense that we had the personal experience of the frustration of meeting a patient who needed translation services, and that was something that we understood. So the first challenge was getting the buy-in of our team members, our medical students. We had to basically describe and defend that there was an issue. And I think, let me write this down, Mr. Derek Fetzer had mentioned as his key point number 2 is that you have to be able to articulate your vision. We were not able to do that initially. So it was really hard to sell our project and get buy-in because we didn't understand the scope of the issue, which is what made it so important for us to analyze the Service Hub results, to understand the process, who were the key players. And then we also had to understand what the provider perception was. And then from there, we realized that selling the project, getting buy-in, was much easier. And from there, the motivation just kind of refueled itself. As people got excited and we weren't meeting a lot of skepticism, we got more and more excited and things were getting done. So that was a key lesson that we learned.
One of the most pivotal moments in our project came when we simply asked for help. We are lucky to be a part of an incredible institution with incredible amount of resources, but no one offers you those resources on a silver platter. We weren't given a list at the beginning of our program saying, this is who you talk to first, and you talk to this person next. If you need this sort of help, you reach out to this person. So as leaders, we had to feel comfortable going around and knocking on doors and reaching out for assistance. So that first moment came for us when we met with Dr. Taylor about midway through the journey. And we asked him, we said, you know, we're having trouble reaching out to ED leadership. Can you help us do that? And being humble in that moment led to many rewards after that. So that meeting with Dr. Taylor led to 2 more meetings with ED leadership, bed flow, and nursing management, which led to 2 more meetings each, and on and on and on. So through that, we started to build this network of interprofessional connections. And it was important for us to nurture those connections by reaching out and saying, we value different perspectives. We need to hear your perspectives, and also expressing gratitude afterwards for everyone's efforts. So of course we faced many other challenges along the way, and we learned a lot of seemingly simple lessons, but important ones. As residents and as med students, we are very busy, and we have very conflicting schedules, which led to many challenges in meeting face-to-face, but we found out that by planning in advance, that allowed for flexibility in scheduling. We are lucky to live in a modern era where we can communicate in multiple different ways: Twitter, Snapchat, FaceTime, text, emails, so we can be in constant communication. However, we found that nothing replaces the value of face-to-face meeting. We had our greatest progress when we sat down as a group and really dug down deep into the problem and came up with a list of tasks. And also it allowed us to build better rapport within our team as well. So at the end of each of these face-to-face meetings, which we usually had on about a monthly basis, we came up with a list of tasks, and we felt confident in each other to get those tasks done, but we only found that the momentum that we built at those team face-to-face meetings was continued to be refueled by having this consistent closed-loop communication. And this is something that we talk a lot about in medicine. So if I give you a task to do, I want to hear back from you when you complete that to know that it's done. So to conclude with some leadership lessons that we're going to take away from this project and this whole amazing experience. Leaders who believe in their cause, who are enthusiastic about their cause, will unite others around that cause. They'll get buy-in if they show passion and enthusiasm for through their beliefs. Self-awareness not only elevates your own personal performance, but that of others as well. By identifying your strengths and being honest about your weaknesses, you encourage others to do the same, and it allows you to find potential in other people as well, and not only yourself. And of course, face-to-face communication preserves the integrity of humanistic leadership. By bonding with our team on face-to-face basis, we found that we made the greatest progress. This has been an absolutely incredible journey for us, and we are so internally thankful for this opportunity. We'd of course like to thank Dr. Bill Morley, our fabulous coach, who provided amazing guidance and support both individually and for the progress of our project. We'd like to thank Drs. John Feagin and Dr. Dean Taylor for this incredible opportunity, as well as being amazing mentors and role models for physician leaders. We'd like to thank Joe Doty, Cindy, and Stacy, and the rest of the faculty Feagin and administrators for their support, and of course our fellow Feagin scholars for inspiring us with their enthusiasm and passion. Thank you so much for listening. We'll take any questions.
All right, so who has a question for Team 3? All right, I got to go to the back. Pardon me, thank you.
Thanks, Leah. My name's Mike Rapaz. I'm with Bragg. Thank you, Dr. Taylor and Dr. Feagin, for letting us be a part of this. As a son of a deaf widow, I spent many times experiencing this, having to interpret myself long words that I didn't know and wasn't qualified to be communicating to a woman in pain. So I really appreciate what you guys are doing with this. Now, currently, I have the privilege to see a lot of these same patients that you're talking about, sometimes in your clinics, sometimes in your homes or in their homes. And one of the things that I notice is that there's a breakdown not only in the ED that you guys are looking at, but as you guys partner with your external resources, whether it's bracing, whether it's pharmaceutical, whether it's physical therapy, a lot of times we'll get a prescription or we'll get an order without knowing what the language barrier is, and there's a delay in service. You know, so one thing, did you think about ways to communicate through Epic, whether it's the external order going out, being able to put that language request in there in order to expedite that service outside the clinic or outside the hospital as well?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think it harkens back to one of the root of the problem is communication, and identifying ways that communication can be improved. Specifically to your question of how that can be improved for outside of the emergency department and moving forward. I know after we met with we gave this talk to the of this issue with the Provider Optimization Council, the council that basically says yay or nay on what you can change in the Epic interface. When we showed them the diagram of the different areas or different facets of breakdown and communication, I know that they are working on making changes at point 0 in the triage all the way down the line. For us and our team and what we focused on from the consulting provider standpoint, we really just focused on that. But I know that that Provider Optimization Council is very excited about that, and they're kind of starting to build up ways that they can make similar changes to the interface. But nothing in particular that is happening right now that I know of, but I know they're working on it. I don't know when that's going to be rolled out.
Dan Bruno, so I work with Duke Health IT. And so what I'd like to do is first of all, thank you. You know, very important, and I knew that it was very well received. And what I'd like to do is help you, if you want to champion this, work through the wickets of doing that, if I can do it. Okay, I'll talk to you later then.
Just a quick comment as much as a question. So I think this group really captured the essence of this forum, right? So leading without the authority to do that, you made a change in Epic. Bravo. So I guess from a question standpoint is a little bit of reflection about how that feels. So you heard from examples earlier today of people who were brave and courageous and made change within a bigger system, really without the authority or the title to do that. I'm guessing that starting off the conversation with "I'm a Feagin scholar" didn't really get you anywhere. So thoughts about that? Any comments?
Thank you for that question, Dr. Peterson. So, like I said earlier, yeah, you're right. You know, putting out that initial email and saying, "Hi, I'm a Feagin scholar," you know, didn't get us. All the doors didn't open the way that we may have thought they would have. So it's about the idea of just reaching out for help and knowing that there are these resources out there that someone else knows about. Like Nate may know about one resource that I have no idea about. So it's about starting to build those connections. And maybe not every connection will lead to another door. Some of them will be dead ends, and we found that. Some, sadly, we didn't get any responses back, or the response that we got back didn't necessarily lead to an improvement. But knowing that continuing to do that, continuing to reach out for help, because there are people that have those pearls of wisdom. Like the meeting that Aman and Anthony had and I had with the head of nursing, the chief nursing staff at the ED, was immensely powerful, because she's the one on the sidelines. She's the one hearing these problems from her nurses about the process being fragmented and broken. And I didn't anticipate getting that much out of that meeting. I thought it would maybe, lead to a couple little, recommendations here and there, but it bought me more buy-in as well. Like I felt more powerful about my project just by meeting with her.
Hi, I'm Harold Laros. I'm a previous Feagin scholar from last year. Angela mentioned something I thought was really interesting about getting buy-in from everybody on the team, especially people who are coming from very different places in their training. And our theme this weekend is leading without authorities. I'm curious, Anthony and Aman, as the people who are lower on the totem pole, how did you guys exercise your leadership over the course of the project?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what was really great about this group is that we all, I think that was mentioned, the disc profile really helped with this, that we all kind of identified our strengths and weaknesses. And it may not have been as much exercising our authority, but it was saying that I think my value is in these specific things. And I think I can provide value to this group. And in that way, I can kind of, maybe that evens the playing field, so to speak, or kind of says yeah, even though maybe you're low on the totem pole, there is stuff that you can contribute still, or there's you feel confident about that then.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think one of the things that we made sure to do at every single one of our meetings was for each one of us to walk away with that, knowing what was the next step for us, and knowing what we needed to do when we closed that piece of communication, what our team was relying on based on what our strengths and our limitations were, and then how we were able to communicate that back into our team to ensure that the whole process kept moving forward throughout the year.
Yeah, just a quick note on these two. They were extremely remarkable and valuable, and I think one of the leadership skills that we used on these two is we would give them a Red Bull, and then we would give them positive feedback, and they were analyzing data. It was incredible. An outstanding job.
We will congratulate Team 3 on work very well done. Final words?
Yes. So Team 3, if you could come over here while I'm talking to everybody else, and Dr. Feagin, if you could come up and get a picture with the team. All of you, I have to say, just like with the Super Canoes, Team Rapido, I wrote down the emotion that I'm feeling. It's incredibly, I'm incredibly proud of all of them. I'm incredibly proud of all of you scholars for your efforts, and they changed how we take care of patients. That patient-centeredness, they took that seriously. And I also want to acknowledge, they did it, but I want to acknowledge from our standpoint, the team coaches do a tremendous job. So Bill Morley, fabulous job with your team. Let's give him a round of applause. Team 4, Joe Doty and Cecily Peterson, fabulous job with your teams. Joe wears multiple hats with this group, an individual coach, team coach, executive director, fundraiser. So Joe, thanks for all you do. Really appreciate it. Well, I thank you all. It's been a great start to the forum, and I look forward to seeing you tonight and tomorrow morning. Whoop. Last word. John Feagin always gets the last word.
This isn't the last word by any means, but I do want to thank so many people for this. Many years ago, one of the great mentors, leaders that I served with in the military was General Andrew Goodpaster, who had been in the White House with 3 presidents. And one of his things was he would say, I never wanted you to use the word leadership without an adjective. And he said the 2 adjectives that I appreciate the most about leadership are, first one is moral, ethical leadership, and the second one is collaborative leadership. Don't you? So I want to tell you that today has been a special joy, and I have so many thank yous, all of the scholars, new scholars, people with inquisitive, with interest here, and they really fulfill that mantra of leadership of putting the adjective in front of it, meaningful, moral, ethical leadership. Thank you all for being here.